The estate was completely immersed in the night, pitch darkness, and there was no light in any of the windows. On the table among the books lay a prepared bag of ice. Diana thought that she had long been accustomed to this, but every time she felt awkward. Perhaps it was because of the gray, chilling eyes, the owner of which looked at Diana like a hungry animal. When they first met, she could not even imagine that he would look at her with such a look. Diana asked Albert where this time, and he replied that today it would be the cheek. Albert leaned over Diana and looked at her with a cold, piercing gaze. He added that he was wearing a uniform and gloves, so today it would be better to do it on the cheek. Diana suggested that Albert take off his gloves, but he refused, saying that his hands were very cold. She opened the bag and, taking out a piece of ice, said that she would now check how much its temperature had changed. Diana put ice on Albert's forehead and said that today he was not as cold as before. She added, looking into his eyes, if he suddenly feels that he is feeling hot, he should definitely say so. But Diana, even from a distance, felt that a strong cold was blowing from Albert. He did not change, and the ice melted only in Diana's hands. He looked at the girl and said that she knew very well that he was never hot. Diana replied hopefully that the day might come when Albert would feel the heat. The young man pressed the ice more tightly to his head, and sighing replied that it was unlikely that such a thing would happen. But when Diana was 19 years old, an event occurred that completely turned her life upside down. She had an accident, and after the accident she was able to be reborn, but this rebirth was very unusual. She became the heroine of one of the novels that she loved to read so much in a past life. While reading these novels, her hands went cold and her heart began to beat fast, because the plots were simply unpredictable and the author was a genius. A novel is interesting when it remains on the pages of a book, but if you are its hero, then it's a completely different feeling. Diana sat in the living room opposite her brother Andrew and assured him that he had understood everything wrong when he saw Charlene talking to another man. Andrew replied that maybe it was her brother, but Charlene herself said that she liked someone. Andrew was handsome and Diana's older brother. He constantly suffered and worried about nonsense. Diana smiled and, pointing her finger at her brother, asked if he had thought that he was the person that Charlene liked. When Andrew replied that this could not be, Diana understood that these two heroes would suffer for another 3 years of nonsense and not understand each other, according to the plot of the novel. Charlene Raffaello was one of the main characters in the novel, and now thanked Diana for the fact that a year later, an engagement took place between Charlene and Andrew. Since childhood, Diana did not attend many events and did not have the opportunity to meet Charlene, but when they got to know each other better, it turned out that they were the same age and had a lot in common. But at some point they became very close friends, because Diana made a lot of efforts to bring the main characters, Charlene and Andrew, closer together. Finally, the day of the engagement arrived. This was the best reward for Diana for her efforts. Diana looked at her friend and said that the dress she decided to wear suited her very well. Charlene laughed and replied that they chose this dress together, and no one knew her better than Diana. Diana said that there were still some things to prepare, so she would go first and would really look forward to Charlene at her engagement party. Getting into the carriage, Diana thought that Charlene's parents should handle the engagement, but they died early, and her brother was too far away. Charlene must have been lonely alone in this mansion, but after the engagement, everything will change and she will be happy. And then she saw a knight on a horse who told the servant that he had a letter from Duke Albert and asked him to open the gate. The servant gave the knight a personalized medallion as a pass and asked him to return it after he left the mansion. The knight rushed past the carriage, and Diana wondered what kind of urgent news there could be on the day of the engagement. She suggested that perhaps Duke Albert regretted and wrote in a letter that he could not attend his sister's engagement. Diana felt that goosebumps ran through her body from the appearance of this knight, and she felt cold. She tried not to think about it, but to turn all her thoughts to her best friend's engagement. After some time, the carriage drove into the gates of the palace, where the event was to take place on the occasion of the engagement of Charlene and Andrew. Everyone was waiting for Charlene to arrive, but instead of her appearing, a letter was delivered saying that she was breaking off the engagement. Diana dreamed so much of seeing her brother Andrew and friend Charlene in front of the altar. She imagined the happy faces of two loving people who had received a blessing. She had already seen the happy faces of loved ones who saw off the young people to the beginning of their life together. Diana was very worried that her brother Andrew was getting very drunk from boredom from that day on. Moreover, according to the plot, A villain appeared who gained Diana's trust and tried to slander her that she was to blame for the broken engagement. But she played the role of Cupid for so long so that her friend and brother were happy in marriage. Finally, Charlene arrived herself, and Diana heard from her friend that she had indeed broken off her engagement to Andrew and asked what the reason was. After all, her brother had just been glowing with happiness and suddenly turned gloomy. Were they really not in harmony before their engagement? Diana took her friend's hands and felt her shaking all over. Charlene said that the breaking of the engagement was for a very important reason. She added that a knight from the northern lands had arrived and brought a message from her older brother, which she was only able to read now. Charlene told Diana that her older brother Albert did not allow her engagement to Andrew. She added that apparently the brother simply thought that she liked one person, but when he found out about the engagement ceremony, he did not allow it, since he did not personally know the person with whom his sister wants to connect her life. At that moment, Andrew came over, and Charlene said that she didn't want to break off the engagement because of her own fault, because their relationship was truly real. Then the servant came up and whispered something quietly in Charlene's ear. The girl apologized to Andrew and Diana and said that she needed to go away for a while. Andrew looked after Charlene and asked Diana to catch up with her. Diana asked why he couldn't do this himself, but Andrew replied that he would run to the ends of the earth for her. The brother replied that if he left now, bad rumors might spread among the guests. Diana decided to help Andrew and said that she would be back soon. She entered the room where her friend was supposed to be, and did not want to believe what she saw. Charlene stood in the arms of a man and cried on his chest, and he tried to calm her down. And then she saw his gray eyes, his chilling gaze like a haze that appeared and disappeared. Only one thought came to Diana's mind. Charlene, who could cry so calmly on this man's chest, this is Duke Albert. Diana visited the house of the Raffaello family and therefore often saw portraits of her brother and sister. Charlene looked like a sparkling blue lake, and her brother gave the impression of a very cold person to whom all interests were alien. Those portraits were painted when Andrew was 12 years old, and now he is already 24. Diana has seen how his figure has changed after defeating many monsters. His hair was no longer so silver, but his gaze remained just as chilling. When Albert put on his helmet, Charlene asked if his brother was really going to leave right now, but he replied that he wrote all this to her in a letter. Seeing his sister's tears, he said that she should sit and calm down, and he would close the door. Then he met Diana's gaze and said that there was no need to stand in the doorway. If she wanted to come in, she could do so, but if not, then she should leave the room. Diana was very surprised by his words and considered his behavior terrible. From Charlene's stories, Diana knew that Albert lost his parents at the age of 16 and received the title of Duke. From an early age, he saw the whole dark side of aristocratic society, but Alberto's focus has always been on his younger sister, Charlene. The imperial palace silently watched Albert and waited for the moment, trying to discover his weak point. Diana decided to help her friend calm down and wanted to enter the room. She walked to the door and pushed it open with a strong push. And then she ran into Albert at the door and accidentally touched his chest with her hand. The next second, she instantly recoiled and pulled her hand away because she felt a strong, unbearable cold. Albert decided not to interfere with the girls' conversation and left the room. When the friends were left alone, Diana said that Charlene's eyes were swollen from crying and her makeup was ruined. Then she added that if the bride comes out to the guests in this form, everyone will think that this is a marriage of convenience. Having seated Charlene in front of the dressing table, Diana thought that she should not talk about what she recognized in the knight as her brother Albert. She asked her friend if she was really crying because of the knight who came from Duke Raffaello. Charlene replied that the knight had brought a letter from her brother Albert, which upset her greatly. Charlene said that the knight would stay here for another month, and Diana would have found out about the letter anyway. The message said that as soon as everything was ready, Charlene would have to come north with the knight sent by her brother Albert. Having finished reading the letter, Diana looked into her friend's blue eyes and decided that under no circumstances should she be allowed to go north. She decided that at any cost, she would meet and talk with this Albert. After telling Charlene that she needed to get some fresh air, Diana quickly left the palace. She knew that in the novel there was no talk that Charlene should go north, and perhaps Diana herself became the culprit, since her actions influenced the course of events. Not finding Albert in the park, she remembered that the knight had arrived on a horse and went towards the stables. Seeing the open door, Diana hoped that Albert had not gone anywhere and she could find him there. Then she heard something heavy fall inside and hurried to quickly go into the stable. Everything became quiet inside, and Diana quietly looked inside. The next second, she saw Duke Albert lying on the ground, and his helmet lying next to him. In her past life, Diana read so many novels that she could easily guess what exactly happened to Duke Albert. Diana was sure that this was poisoning by magic, which exists only in the northern lands. 2 years later, an alchemist discovered this unknown disease, which appears only in visitors who have been in the north for a long time and is very difficult to identify. Visitors who had been under the influence of the northern lands for a long time became infected with this mana, which was very similar in appearance to a second heart. When mana becomes polluted, all physical processes are disrupted. But while a person is in the north, magic replaces mana, and the body works as usual. Staying in the north provides a person with safety, but if he left those places, then he must definitely return. But as it turned out, all Diana's efforts regarding Charlene and Andrew did not end up with such a happy ending. And now Diana saw that reading about this disease in a novel and seeing how it manifests itself in reality are completely different things. Bending over Albert, she understood that this problem urgently needed to be solved and imagined how this could be done. Diana, with difficulty, loaded the Duke onto the horse and went to the alchemist Fernando, whose whereabouts she knew from a past life. She had a rough idea of what this house should look like. There was always a smoking chimney, and the house was painted with bright colors, as if some kind of madness was going on there. Finally, finding the alchemist at home, Diana began to incessantly drum on the door. Fernando opened the door and nervously said that he did not need to buy newspapers, and did the stranger really not see the corresponding ban on his door. He had such a keen interest in the study of magical poisoning that he personally traveled to the northern lands and eventually invented a cure for the disease. Diana answered the alchemist that she did not sell newspapers, but on the contrary, she had a very important request regarding the northern lands and magic. She added that a hidden disease has been discovered on these lands, and she has strong evidence for this. After these words, Diana pointed to the horse and asked the alchemist to look at the man she had brought. Having examined the Duke, Fernando said in surprise that this was an ideal specimen, and immediately changing his attitude towards Diana, invited her to urgently enter the house. Pulling Albert onto his shoulder, he carried him into the house and asked Diana to be careful and not step on his manuscripts. Having carefully studied Albert, the alchemist said that this was real northern magic, and was surprised that the patient's entire body was filled with it. Diana asked Fernando to heal Duke Albert at all costs. The alchemist replied that it would be difficult, although he had researched this disease, but this was only in practice, and he did not have a suitable medicine. Diana replied that she would need ice crystals soaked in the magic of the northern lands, then inject holy water into them, and after heating them over a fire, add them to the patient's body. The alchemist looked at the girl in surprise, and Diana asked him not to ask how she knew this. She knew too many proportions, so she came to Fernando. The alchemist replied that northern ice is not so easy to melt with ordinary fire. The next second, Diana snapped her finger, and when a magical flame appeared in her palm, she said that Fernando need not worry about this ingredient. It seems that the alchemist has seen so much in his life that he was not at all surprised by this magic, and only said that he would immediately begin mixing the remaining ingredients. After some time, the first sample was made, and the alchemist said that he had made it in average proportions. Diana took the crystal and asked if there would be any side effects. The alchemist replied that he tested it with the help of candle fire. The magic does not disappear, but at least weakens and acts on the patient as a sedative. Diana resolutely approached Albert. All she had to do was summon a flame to melt the crystal. She began to touch the Duke's body, first applying and then removing ice. And suddenly she felt a sensation similar to small tingling sensations, like an electric shock. Albert's body began to emit some kind of aquamarine glow, which gradually filled the entire room. The alchemist looked in surprise and said that the reaction was very unexpected and unusual, and Diana said that something was wrong because this haze should dissipate. At some point, the magical power began to be absorbed against her will, and Diana did not understand why this was happening. At some point, the haze became so dense that the girl could no longer distinguish Albert's outline. Diana wondered in horror if she had really killed the main character's brother, and he had disappeared forever. She already saw her friend's gaze in front of her, full of sadness, and thought about what would happen to Charlene and Andrew. Now she could be sent to prison. The authorities will declare her a murderer, and news about her will appear in the newspaper headlines. The next second, Albert's body began to appear, and the alchemist said that he looked too normal for a dead person, and this urgently needed to be recorded in the observation book. Diana looked closely and noticed that the Duke's chest was rising and falling, which meant he was breathing. The girl looked at the Duke's face and decided that it looked very peaceful. When Albert's breathing evened out, Diana sighed in relief. Fernando wrote in the book that the fire could partially cleanse the patient's body of magic, and then said that when Albert wakes up, it is necessary to ask him about everything. The flame did not burn for long and began to die out, and the acrid smoke and black ice gradually disappeared completely. Diana sat next to her and thought about how sweetly Albert was sleeping, but a minute ago he could have died. When she was convinced that the Duke was healed, she told the alchemist that she urgently needed to return to the palace because she said that she had gone out to get some fresh air and they were probably worried there. But before Diana had time to move away from Albert, he abruptly took her hand, which greatly frightened the girl. Albert opened his eyes and said that now he felt the warmth of Diana's hand. At first, she thought that he did this in a dream, but when she saw the Duke's eyes open, she asked if he could see her. Albert silently looked at Diana, and she thought that this would not end today. Diana gradually, finger by finger, freed her hand and hurried to leave because she could be lost. She quickly wrote him a letter for him to read when he fully woke up, about how he ended up here and about his illness of magic poisoning. Now Diana did not have time to think about the Duke. She needed to solve two important problems. She understood that the ceremony had already ended, and the first thing she had to do was listen to the lectures of her relatives, who were worried about her. The second thing was to somehow calm down my brother. As the title of the novel suggests, there are recurring elements of fantasy throughout the novel, one of which is a special skill that the members of the protagonist's family possessed. Apparently, at that moment, Andrew experienced those feelings that subconsciously forced him to use this gift. The maid ran after Diana and shouted that the second part of the house was also already all on fire. This gift was passed down from generation to generation, and the direct descendants of the Valerian family could control fire. Thanks to this skill, all members of the clan had red hair and red eyes. Andrew also had this gift, but did not control it due to his explosive nature and temperament. Diana shouted at her brother that stop setting everything on fire. Either he should calm down or not leave the room. She added that alcohol will not solve the problem and will not affect their relationship with Charlene. Diana advised her brother to stop setting everything on fire and calm down, and tomorrow to visit Charlene and decide everything regarding their engagement. Andrew looked at his sister and began to calm down, then asked them to do it together. Albert felt a piercing cold and thought that this was his punishment for taking the lives of other people. He really wanted to see Charlene because they had been separated from his sister for so long. Albert remembered how his sister once sent him a portrait of Diana, who looked at him from the canvas, as if she knew everything in advance. The letter received along with the portrait also mentioned Diana's brother Andrew, about whom Charlene wrote with particular warmth. Albert wanted to do a lot for his sister Charlene, but he would not want her to have the life that he lives. At that moment, he was in a fog. Albert did not understand where these thoughts came from and what was happening around him. The next second, he felt the warmth of touch and heard a voice, as if he had already reached heaven, which said that the Duke was sleeping very sweetly, and this evoked a feeling of calm. He could not yet distinguish this light silhouette, but he felt sadness in those moments when this color moved away. Albert wanted to grab this something so as not to feel upset at its distance. Finally, he hardly opened his eyes and looking around saw a room unfamiliar to him. He sat down on the floor and did not see anywhere the silhouette that he had seen in his dream and from which such warmth came. At that moment, Fernando approached him and began to ask about what the Duke was experiencing. Perhaps he was hot or cold. How long had he been experiencing such symptoms, and how long had he been in the north? Albert instantly grabbed the alchemist by the throat and asked what this place was and who he even was. Looking forward to the next morning, Diana went to Fernando's house to visit Albert. Opening the door, Diana saw an alchemist collecting manuscripts and some tests from the floor and asked what happened here. Fernando replied that thank God everything was fine now, but as soon as the Duke woke up, he almost destroyed his entire laboratory. The alchemist added that the letter written by Diana helped him come to his senses, and before leaving, he asked Fernando to make a magic item. After making sure that everything was fine with the Duke, Diana returned home because she and her brother planned to visit Charlene at Raffaello's house today. Approaching the gates of the estate, Diana wondered if she could ask Charlene where the knight she saw yesterday was. Walking through the garden, she thought about why they didn't plant flowers on the lawns here, as if time had stopped in the house after Albert left. When Diana and Andrew approached the house, the brother said that he was very worried and that maybe it would be best if they talked outside. The sister replied that there was a wonderful greenhouse behind the house, and it would be perfect for conducting such a conversation, creating a cozy atmosphere. She added that she would be waiting for them in the greenhouse and advised her brother to take casual conversations with Charlene on abstract conversations on the way here. Andrew thanked Diana for her advice and said that he was very glad that he had such a smart sister. Finding the greenhouse was not difficult for Diana because she and Charlene spent a lot of time there together. She knew that her friend continued to carefully care for the flowers that Charlene's parents had planted. And then Diana heard some strange metallic sound. She turned around warily and saw Duke Albert, who was in the same garden. She caught the Duke's mood and thought that it was all because of his illness, which did not give him the opportunity to take his sister to the north. And then Diana noticed that Albert's eyes had become completely different, unlike what they had been before. The girl suggested that perhaps the Duke received magic lenses from Fernando and politely greeted him. The Duke greeted him back and said that he did not feel completely well yet. He then added that while he was with the alchemist Fernando, he heard something from him. At first he thanked Diana for caring so much about his sister, but the girl saw some kind of threat in his eyes. Then the Duke added with a serious look that if Diana had told a lie, he would never forgive her for it. Diana tried to pretend that she did not notice this, but only politely replied that they did not understand what they were talking about. The next moment, the girl didn't expect Albert to take her hand. Diana felt such a strong cold that it was impossible to endure it. She said that someone might see them, and the Duke replied that it turns out that it was not a lie. Diana said that other than Charlene, she had no connection with this person, so she had no intention of harming anyone. To which the Duke replied that Diana did not even ask who his sister was and why the knight spoke to her first. For a moment, Diana thought that he was simply testing her, and she did not know what to answer him at that moment. Albert continued, telling Diana that he was going to tell her everything himself. Then he added that in the near future, he would have to see her often, just like his sister, so it was better to tell everything right away. The Duke was silent for a while, and then asked if he could hope that this conversation would remain secret between them. Diana recalled that she is a very close friend of Charlene, and therefore no one will know about their conversation. She then asked why the Duke said that they would see each other often, but he replied that, according to the alchemist, he needed to constantly recharge his energy. He took out magic crystals and explained that this must be done before the symptoms of the disease appear. Diana understood why, when the Duke took her hand, the same glow and the same feeling of causticity appeared in her body. She answered the Duke that it was absolutely not necessary to meet with her because he could melt the crystal in any fire. Albert replied that according to the alchemist, no other fire could produce the desired effect like Diana's magical fire. Diana was surprised that during her absence, the alchemist Fernando was able to achieve such results and now knows almost everything about this disease and how to get rid of it, or at least reduce its influence. A minute later, Charlene appeared in the distance with Andrew. She wanted to shout to her brother, but she immediately corrected herself and called the knight Sir Diego. When they came closer, Diana saw the dissatisfied look of her brother, who asked Charlene, pointing to the knight, who he was. Diana remembered that they were strangers. She introduced her brother as Nathan Diego, who came from the north. She added that this man would stay here for about a month and would accompany her everywhere, and then invited everyone to drink tea. When everyone sat down at the table in the center of the greenhouse, Charlene said that she would bring dessert, which Sir Diego would probably like. Andrew looked at the knight and said that he came from the north, and perhaps was seeing Charlene for the first time. But for some reason, it seemed to him that they were quite close. Albert replied that unlike some, he gets along with people very easily and quickly finds a common language. Diana looked at both men and couldn't help but notice the way they looked at each other. Albert said that Andrew was acting childish only because Charlene was paying more attention to him. And then Diana came up with a brilliant idea. She will invite them to make peace and shake hands. At this moment, Albert will be able to recharge with their magical energy, and after one, they will make peace. The next moment she imagined that everything had happened successfully, and they shook hands and made peace, and said out loud that she would entrust one matter to her brother. Finally, Charlene appeared and brought a table with all sorts of sweets and desserts. Even a blind man would notice that she was paying too much attention to the knight, offering him to try one dish and then another. But when Charlene said that she would be glad if the Duke's taste had not changed, it immediately became clear to everyone that they knew each other. If the servants had seen them at this moment, they might have misunderstood this situation, especially Andrew. And then Diana realized that she needed to intervene in the situation in order to distract everyone from what was happening. She turned to Charlene and said that she wanted to ask for his forgiveness. This helped her distract Charlene from the Duke, and she continued, "Does her friend remember the day when she managed to disappear for some time?" And Charlene was very worried. The friend replied that she was really worried about Diana, but when she sent a note, Charlene calmed down. She added that the note said that Diana was feeling a little unwell and was glad that she felt better the next day. Diana once again apologized to her friend and said that she had written a lie in the letter and had lied to her. And when Charlene asked what really happened, Diana fell silent for a second, thinking about how to get out of this situation. Diana caught Albert's gaze, who asked with all his appearance not to talk about what really happened. Diana tried to smile innocently and said that evening she ran after Sir Diego. Charlene looked at her friend in surprise and asked for what purpose she did this. Diana said that she wanted to talk to the knight about not taking Charlene with him to the north, as her brother asked. Charlene smiled and replied that she never expected such an act from her friend. Diana added that the Duke was delighted with the friendship of the girls and agreed not to take Charlene to the north. She looked at Albert and added that the knight had promised to talk to her brother about agreeing to this proposal. Charlene looked at her brother and asked if the knight really answered like that. Albert looked at Diana, and she was very frightened by his gaze. It even seemed to her that he was now going to attack her like a wild animal. But then the Duke turned to his sister and said that this was exactly how he answered Diana. He added that he would convey everything to Charlene's brother, then added that he would stay here for a month to observe how the lady was doing and would convey everything to the Duke. Diana couldn't find any words other than to say that she was glad to see him. And Charlene added that Diego would recognize them when he had lived here for a month, and there was no person in the world who would treat her better than Andrew. Diana looked at her brother and did not understand why he looked so dejected. Charlene also paid attention to Andrew's behavior, because he should be happy and not vice versa. Finally, Andrew turned to Diana and asked why he didn't know anything about Charlene being taken north. Then Diana realized that, trying to hide one secret, she had accidentally given away another, because no one wanted Andrew to know that Charlene had to leave. He then turned to Charlene and said if Diana hadn't let it slip, he would never have known anything about it. Charlene looked at Andrew with guilty eyes and did not know what to answer him, feeling guilty. Without waiting for an answer from either Charlene or Diana, Andrew stood up, apologized, and headed for the exit. Charlene jumped up from the table and shouted that she and Andrew needed to talk. Diana also stood up and said that maybe it would be better if she talked to Andrew, because she knew her brother better. But Charlene said that it would be more correct and better if she explained everything to him herself. Diana tried to find a reason to leave, saying that she remembered that she had a very important matter. And then Albert said that he was still haunted by the words that Diana said at the table. Diana was afraid that Albert would now begin to interrogate her about how she knew about his illness. He asked if she meant energy when she said that she would entrust her brother with an important matter. Without waiting for an answer, Albert added that if this is so, then Diana should give up this idea, because he is categorically against it. He doesn't like Andrew enough to let anyone touch him, and the thought makes him shiver. Albert then added that the most important thing is that he doesn't like it when anyone knows about his weakness. Diana replied that then, probably, the Duke would not be entirely comfortable because she was Andrew's sister, and suggested looking for another person controlling the fire. Albert said that this was categorically excluded because as few people as possible should know about it, and he could not trust anyone who could act for his own benefit. Diana realized that she had no choice and replied that the Duke could rely on her, and she would try to take care of him. Hearing these words, Albert involuntarily smiled and said that he would look forward to meeting again. Noticing this, Diana did not understand whether he smiled sincerely or whether it was just a mockery. The next day, while Diana was still sleeping, the servants were busy at the estate. They talked about how everything should be ready in advance and before the mistress called them. One of the servants said how they could wear such heavy outfits, and the second replied that in any case, their mistress would be the most beautiful at the ball. Going out into the hall, Diana heard their conversation and asked what ball they were talking about. They replied that they had recently brought an invitation to a ball dedicated to Her Majesty's birthday, and the servants were doing everything possible to ensure that their mistress was the most beautiful there. Hearing this, Diana was very surprised. She knew nothing about the princess having a birthday. One of the servants said that this was a very important ball before the princess came of age, so invitations were sent to all the aristocrats. Diana thought about it, because lately she had been so busy with the two main characters that she had not attended any balls, ceremonies, or other parties and tea parties. Diana didn't really want to go to this event, but she still decided to return to the room to read the invitation. She rummaged through the pile of letters until she found the envelope she needed from Deborah Francis. Princess Bastia of the Empire was the only heir to the throne. She disliked Albert and hated Charlene, often mocking her. Deborah was the main villain of this novel. It all started with the former spouses of Raffaello, whose lives suddenly began to change. The emperor intended to marry his daughter to Albert in order to annex the Duchy of Raffaello. But almost 4 years passed, and Albert was 19 years old, but he was still against marrying the princess. The emperor's patience ran out, and he offered Albert 2 options to choose from. He had to either marry Deborah or move north. If he had chosen the first, then his sister Charlene would have become a duchess from childhood and would have known all the aristocratic dirt with all its unsightly details. Therefore, he chose the second option and, without hesitation, left for the north. But Deborah was still dissatisfied with this, because for so many years she had endured the refusals of a man whom she did not even love. Diana woke up when the servants opened the curtains wide, and the room was flooded with bright sunlight. When the servant asked if the lady had found what she was looking for, Diana replied that she had read the letter and, together with Charlene, was going to go to the imperial palace for the ball, which would take place in 4 days. The servants were worried that there was very little time for preparation, and Diana said that all the most beautiful dresses had probably already been sold out, and she would have to go in what she had. The servant replied that this would not work. She needed to contact Charlene, who had probably prepared several outfits and would be able to lend her one of the dresses. The servant took Diana by the hand and, going out into the street, said that the carriage was just ready. They needed to immediately leave for the Raffaello estate. When Diana entered the large, spacious, and bright hall, she was informed that the lady was trying on outfits, and Lady Diana could go to her. Charlene's dressing room looked like one of the expensive stores that were located in the center of the capital. There was a lot of jewelry, expensive shoes, and beautiful outfits. And suddenly Diana saw Albert, but what could he do here because he was pretending to be a knight? She greeted the Duke politely and decided that he must have come here to fulfill some request of Charlene. But then Charlene was informed that Lady Diana had arrived. Charlene left the fitting room and told her friend that it was very good that she had come, because Charlene had chosen a beautiful dress, but could not find accessories to go with it. She complained to Diana that the maids were trying very hard, but their advice and opinions differed, and therefore it was very difficult to choose. Charlene added that Diana has excellent taste, and perhaps she will help her choose jewelry. The next moment, Charlene turned to Albert and asked if he could also help throw it away, because the more people involved, the better. Albert replied that if Charlene is ready to listen to his opinion, she can try on the jewelry that lies right in front of him. At the same moment, Diana pointed to the same jewelry and, at the same time as Albert, said that she had chosen a suitable necklace for Charlene. The second Diana and Albert's hands touched, she felt that the Duke still felt cold, but not as much as before. Albert held Diana's hand, and she tried to say that she was getting cold and asked to let her go. The Duke only moved his lips imperceptibly, but Diana could read from them that he did not want to let her go. Diana understood why he was holding her hand, because of his illness he so wanted to feel warmth. Still, this situation was dangerous because others could misunderstand them. Indeed, Charlene saw it, and it seemed like she was very surprised at first. But her thoughts immediately dissipated the moment Diana said that she and the knight had chosen the same jewelry for her, which means she should wear it. Diana thought that she needed to stay a little away from the Duke and decided to step aside, but suddenly she heard the voice of her maid, Daisy, who turned to Charlene. The servants, almost crying, turned to Charlene and asked her to scold her mistress Diana. Daisy tried to explain her dissatisfaction because Diana wanted to wear one of her existing dresses to the ball in the Imperial Palace, simply altering it, but this cannot be done. Charlene replied that she did not know that Diana was also going to go to this ball, otherwise she would have invited her to choose outfits together. Diana could not hear their conversation, but seeing that Charlene and the servants were whispering, she asked what they were up to. The next moment, a beautiful bright dress appeared in front of Diana, and Charlene said that her friend should definitely try it on. Charlene turned to Daisy and asked if she agreed with her opinion, to which she replied that this dress would look great on the lady. Charlene turned to Albert and asked if he agreed with her choice. The Duke replied that, looking only at the dress, he could not say anything, and then he approached the servant, took the outfit from her and headed towards Diana. He pressed the dress to her body, and it seemed to Diana that he was so close that she even felt his breath. Diana felt so awkward in front of everyone that the only thing she could say was that this dress did not suit her, and no one around, except Diana, heard how Albert told her that within a month he would come up to her and touch her more often. He then quietly added that no matter how hard Diana tried, she couldn't run away from him all the time. He then turned to Charlene and said that he thought the dress suited Diana very well. Diana wanted to run, but Charlene persuaded her to try on the rest of the outfits, and dragging her behind the curtain, began to take out shoes and jewelry. Taking advantage of the moment, Charlene asked Diana what mood Andrew was in yesterday, and Diana replied that his brother was in a good mood. He was smiling all the time. Seeing the smile on Charlene's face, Diana was glad that she was able to calm her friend down. When she left the fitting room in the chosen dress, the Duke said that this outfit suited her very well. Finally, after an hour of tedious dressing, Diana managed to escape from her friend. Albert took the suitcase with jewelry from her hands to help put it in the carriage. Then he asked Diana if her brother was always like this. He got angry, and he calmed down. She realized that he had heard their conversation in the fitting room and said that it was not good to eavesdrop. But the Duke replied that he simply had good hearing. Then Albert looked at Diana and said that Charlene was a weak and timid girl as a child, and she always wanted a strong and reliable man nearby. The Duke added that once, before the debutante ball, a whole line of gentlemen lined up to her and wanted to become her partner. Diana didn't think she would ever defend Andrew and responded that her brother was also considered attractive. At that moment, Daisy shouted that all their things were packed and they could go. Diana took the suitcase from Albert and went down to the carriage. But the next second she felt the Duke's cold hand touch her hair. Albert put his hand on her shoulder and said that in terms of appearance, he could easily beat her brother. He turned Diana towards him and added that his sister was the most beautiful lady in the Empire. Diana was at a loss, but the Duke let her go and told her to be careful on the road. She looked after the Duke and decided that he had gone crazy, and there was not a drop of blood in his body. Albert turned around and said that he had not lied about the dress, and this outfit really suited my lady very well. Sitting in the carriage, Daisy said that she saw how the knight looked at the lady, and perhaps he liked her. Diana laughed and replied that it was nothing like that. They were just Charlene's friends, so the knight tried to behave politely. She added that the knight came from the north at the direction of Duke Raffaello, and of course, he would treat everyone around Charlene with all the attention. When Albert returned to the house, Charlene asked if his brother had talked to Diana about anything special. He replied that there was nothing unusual. He just loaded things into the carriage and that's it. Albert added that if he made a mistake in his behavior, he asks for forgiveness, and Charlene replied that perhaps she just imagined it when she looked out the window. At that moment, a servant came into the room and said that Lady Charlene was waiting in the dressing room. Having left the garden, Albert thought that Diana was avoiding him, afraid of his presence, and seemed to be looking with her eyes for somewhere to hide. For the first time in his life, he complimented a stranger, and Diana recoiled, scared. And as soon as he began to think about Diana, previously unfamiliar feelings appeared inside him. Albert went through different options in his head to set a trap for Diana and meet her again. He wanted to take the girl's hand and hold it as long as possible without letting go. For a moment, he imagined how all this was happening, and then suddenly he caught himself thinking that from the outside he looked very stupid and grinned. Finally, the day of the imperial ball arrived, and Diana's mother warned her daughter that if she spent the night outside the house again, she would be very angry. The father, knowing Andrew's character, told his son to behave with dignity and remember that he was the heir of the family. He then asked if Andrew had changed his mind after his engagement to Lady Raffaello. Andrew replied that his wish remained valid, and his father said that in this case he should only show his good side. Mother said that they would go first, and they could pick up Charlene and come later. Sitting in the carriage, Diana looked at her brother and thought that, although her engagement to Charlene ended happily, the newspapers made a fuss. The fact that the heroes of the celebration did not show themselves to the guests all evening did not go unnoticed, and at the end, a tearful Charlene appeared. After this, rumors appeared that their daughter-in-law was forced to work. The carriage drove up to the porch of the Raffaello estate, and Diana told her brother to go get Charlene, and she would wait in the carriage. After some time, Diana began to worry because neither Andrew nor Charlene were there. She was getting bored because if Andrew and Charlene had a date, then she would have to sit and wait in the carriage. Diana felt stuffy. At first, she decided to go out to get some fresh air, but then she changed her mind because her hair would be ruined. And then suddenly, someone knocked on the carriage door, and the frightened Diana opened the curtain. Diana saw Duke Albert and wondered if he was going to the ball too. She opened the door, and the Duke asked permission to sit in the carriage for a while. Feeling his cold breath and seeing his unhealthy complexion, Diana decided that he was feeling very unwell. Breathing heavily, Albert said that his health was at its limit and asked if Diana had seen an alchemist lately. She replied that she had not seen it, because the last few days she had been preparing for the imperial ball. The Duke realized that Diana did not have crystals and reeled from powerlessness. Diana became worried and said that she urgently needed to find a person who would go to the alchemist for crystals. Albert replied that he had the last crystal and it was in his inner jacket pocket, but he couldn't get it on his own and asked Diana to do it. The girl hesitated at first, but then realized that she had no choice, and in any case she had to touch the Duke. He was so close that Diana felt his cold breath again. Finally, she took out the crystal, put it in Albert's hand, and asked if it was hard for him when she touched his hand. The Duke replied that, on the contrary, he felt warm and did not want to let go of Diana's hand. Albert looked at the girl, and she reminded him that it was necessary for someone to deliver the crystals by visiting the alchemist. Andrew and Charlene approached the carriage and said that the knight was almost like a brother to her, and they would definitely find a common language with Andrew. Noticing them, the Duke put his finger to his lips and, looking at Diana, asked with his eyes that she be silent. And at the moment when Andrew approached the carriage door, Albert sharply opened it. Andrew grabbed the cheek where the blow fell, and thinking that this was Diana, he said that his sister was very careless. Then he saw a knight who told Diana that he had not noticed her brother. Apparently, he was a very inconspicuous person. Andrew was indignant at how the Duke could call him an inconspicuous person and tried to attack him without holding back his emotions. And then Charlene intervened. She said that if the four of them were going to go to the ball, then they needed to get rid of the hostility. Albert replied that he would go to the ball on his horse, but Charlene persuaded him that the four of them should go in a carriage. Charlene chirped all the way and said that she was so glad that she and Diana finally went out together. The men, on the contrary, sat with their faces turned away from each other, each looking out of their own window. In such a tense situation, the road to the imperial palace seemed very long to all four of them. Finally, when everyone got out of the carriage, Charlene expressed a desire to enter the palace with the knight. Albert replied that this was not permissible if she entered accompanied by another man. Unpleasant rumors would spread. The Duke added that he and Lady Valerian would enter separately from them and offered her his hand. Diana replied that she accepted his proposal, and she and the Duke headed to the palace. The imperial palace shone in all its splendor as it should be. Diana thought that she had finally gotten out of this uncomfortable carriage, but here the situation was no better. As soon as the four of them were in the hall, Diana heard whispers that the young people had a fight right at the engagement. Some discussed that Lady Charlene had to wipe away tears due to the strict morals of her mother-in-law, while others said that the time of the Valerian family was over. Diana decided that if the four of them crowded like this, they would attract even more negative attention, and therefore they needed to split up. Andrew gallantly extended his hand to Charlene and asked if she would like to dance the first dance with him. Charlene smiled at him and replied that she would be happy to do so. Hearing this, Andrew looked at the Duke with a victorious look and grinned imperceptibly. Diana noticed this and decided that Andrew was acting like a child if he wanted to annoy the Duke with such a stupid prank. And then she turned around and saw Duke Albert leaving, and she called out to him. Albert turned around and she asked if the knight was going to leave his partner alone. The Duke replied that it was unlikely that anything would happen if he were away for a short time. Diana replied that the Duke underestimated aristocrats, and rumors might spread about couples who arrived at the ball together. Albert replied that in this case, he was ready to make efforts to ensure that there were no rumors about Lady Diana. He then added that if you dance at least one dance with your partner, it will definitely not cause rumors. Diana looked at Albert and wanted to understand what was hidden in those gray eyes. Judging by the way he treats his sister, the Duke definitely has some feelings too. But Diana could not understand one thing why he suppresses these feelings for himself, considering them his weak point. Seeing her look, the Duke said that Diana looked at him like a poor puppy. Diana replied that she would look at the puppy completely differently, and Albert did not look so charming. And then an order was heard throughout the palace for everyone to bow their heads. The butler announced His Majesty the Emperor and Princess Deborah Frances. This was the main villain of the novel, who in the book was called the Future Trench. Her words were sharper than daggers, but still she remained the direct heir of Ai and received special skills from the imperial family. They said that the first emperor knew how to control people, but generations passed, and this ability became weaker. But Deborah was born, who fully possessed this power, and then the butler announced the arrival of Elvis Francis. This was Deborah's half-brother, although he did not have any outstanding abilities, but everyone praised him. The emperor looked into the hall and told his daughter that he was very glad that so many guests had arrived to congratulate her on her coming of age. After congratulatory speeches, the princess was immediately surrounded by representatives of aristocratic families. At the same time, there was almost no one around the prince apparently. The guests were afraid of angering the princess. Charlene looked at Deborah, who was impossible to approach, and hoped that she had invited her in order to make peace. She invited Diana to approach the princess and also say hello, but the girl replied that she needed to wait until there were fewer people. The next minute, the girl saw Albert and Andrew quarreling again over something and hurried to separate them as quickly as possible. When the men were finally calmed down, Charlene heard footsteps behind her and turned around. It was Prince Elvis. He greeted the Duchess and said that they used to see each other at balls until the Duke went north, and from that moment, almost 4 years had passed. Elvis congratulated Charlene on her engagement, saying that he learned about it from the newspapers. He then looked at Andrew and asked if this man was her fiancé. Elvis recognized him. It was the eldest son of the Marquis Valerian. He extended his hand to Andrew and said that he had heard a lot about him and about his work for the Empire in those places where help was needed. Diana watched the conversation on the sidelines and thought that although Elvis seems simple, he is still a prince. Elvis noticed her look and turned to say hello and greet the Duchess. The prince noticed Albert and, holding out his hand, asked Diana who this gentleman was next to her. But the Duke withdrew his cold hand in time and said that he was very glad to meet His Majesty. He gallantly put his hand to his chest and, bowing, said that his name was Diego. Diana, afraid that the Prince Elvis recognizes Albert and says that Sir Diego has come to the ball with her as a partner. To distract the prince's attention, she pretended to be a lady who wanted to attract his attention to her. Diana added that, in her opinion, the banquet in the imperial palace was organized at a high level. Everything was very dignified and beautiful. But Elvis seemed to recognize Albert and told Diana that he was very glad to meet her partner. Then the prince looked at Diana and said that, as she had already noticed, he arrived at the ball alone. And now Elvis is just looking for a partner who could join him for the evening. If it weren't for Sir Diego, Elvis would have asked Lady Valerian to become his partner for today. Diana replied that if she had known about this in advance, she would have come to the ball alone. The next second, Albert took Diana's hand and asked if she was going to leave him alone. Noticing this, Elvis said that Sir Diego seemed to like Lady Valerian. The prince looked at Albert, said that he was not going to take his partner away from him and got lost among the guests, wishing to have a good time. Andrew told Diego that there was an immediate difference in the prince's voice when he spoke to him. And then Charlene, seeing that her brother was holding Diana's hand, was very surprised by this. Diana became noticeably embarrassed and pulled her hand away, and Albert politely apologized. Charlene said that the knight probably had good reasons for this, because he was not the kind of person who would just grab a lady's hand. The Duke replied that he had to take Lady Diana's hand, otherwise the prince would not have simply left. To get out of this awkward situation, Diana wanted to say that she needed to go to the restroom, but she accidentally tripped over the hem of her dress and almost fell into Albert's arms. The Duke quietly asked if Diana really intended to go with Prince Elvis. Diana did not have time to answer the Duke, as she noticed that the next second all the guests around them parted. Her Majesty Princess Deborah surrounded by her retinue, was approaching them. She looked arrogantly at Charlene and Andrew and said that she had heard that they broke off their engagement, but they came to the ball together. Apparently, they value each other very much. Andrew replied that these were just stupid rumors and they did not break off their engagement. Deborah told him to shut up because she wasn't talking to him at the moment. The princess told Charlene that she had met Duke Albert as a child and considered him a real scoundrel. Charlene looked at Deborah and realized that reconciliation was out of the question. The princess added that Albert had behaved very insolently towards the emperor, who had good intentions, and hoped that the duke was doing well in the north. Charlene felt the mockery in her voice, but could not say anything against her. Deborah continued by saying that nothing had been heard from the duke for some time, but then rumors came of him being called a monster. Charlene knew that she had to endure. Otherwise, the purpose of the visit to the ball would be doomed, and she might never see her brother if Deborah snapped her finger. Indeed, during Albert's absence, the position of the Raffaello family was greatly shaken. The princess looked at Charlene and said if she had something to answer, then she could try to speak up. Charlene said that she perfectly understood the princess's anger and hatred towards the duke because Albert had rejected her proposal to marry her so many times. Diana looked at Charlene and realized that the real Raffaello, although kind, could easily take on a challenge. Charlene asked Deborah not to be angry with her brother. The princess was simply not his type. The next second, Charlene violated the princess's boundaries and, approaching her closely, said that she wanted to tell her something in her ear. She whispered that it looked like Deborah was trying sweets because she had some leftover dessert stuck on her teeth. Charlene advised her to wipe it before the others noticed, and added that if the princess looked at her brother-like face for so long, her mood might deteriorate. The girl added that she was not going to ruin her holiday, because the princess was the main character today, and she probably wouldn't stay long at the ball. With these words, Charlene proudly turned around and headed towards the exit of the palace. Deborah's face showed undisguised hatred and anger as she watched Charlene leave. Diana was glad that the Duke behaved with dignity and did not get into an argument with the princess, defending his sister, but he looked with concern at the exit through which Charlene left the palace. From Albert's look, Diana understood that he was ready to tear and throw everything for the words spoken by the princess, but since he had to remain silent, he was apparently offended. Diana told the Duke to follow his sister, and she would probably go too, because all her thoughts were on Charlene and her recent conversation with Deborah. She headed into the hall and didn't even look back at her brother or Albert. Diana had her own reason for staying at the ball and not following them. She had to calm a crying Deborah, who was upset about her conversation with Charlene. Diana might have asked the princess why she should cry over such a small thing, but her behavior could be the turning point. Deborah initially bullied Charlene because of her resentment towards Albert, but after today's incident, she may come to hate Charlene herself. Diana was afraid that this Cold War might affect her, too, but she was not going to betray Charlene, and at least someone had to leave Deborah a good impression of themselves today. The princess saw Diana and said that she knew that she was Charlene's best friend and perhaps had come to sort things out with her. Now Deborah looked like just a little girl who was raised in greenhouse conditions. Diana answered the princess that she was not going to do this, but just wanted to relax, but all the places were occupied by other ladies. She sat down next to her and added that she just wanted to relax in the gazebo, but by chance she saw Deborah here. And then Diana began to take off her shoes, saying that her feet were very tired. She told the princess that she could do the same there, because no one could see them here. Deborah answered in surprise how she could take off her shoes. How could Diana suggest this to her? Or was she completely clueless? Diana replied that she considers the princess's words a compliment because she never gets upset. Even if she makes some mistakes or something doesn't work out, she still doesn't despair. Deborah looked at her interlocutor in surprise and said that she was really impudent. Diana replied that until recently she had a pain in her chest, but now, after talking with the princess, she felt much better. She even wanted to laugh. She then added that she only had an older brother, and if she had a younger sister, Diana would treat her exactly the same as a princess. Deborah looked at the girl and said that she had never met people who would treat her the way she did. With these words, the princess stood up and said that she needed to go to the guests, and she was probably already lost. Diana told her after her that the princess should enjoy today's holiday and not listen to anyone, not pay attention to anyone, and behave confidently. After all, the day of coming of age happens once in a lifetime, and the princess has the right to it. Diana breathed a sigh of relief when she returned home in the evening. Diana lay down on the bed and thought that she should wash herself, but if she called the maid Daisy, she would give her evening treatments, and Diana was very tired. She thought about Princess Deborah and hoped that she returned to her guests in a good mood. The book described how the princess was ashamed of running away and later regretted it. And then she heard some strange sounds like knocking on a window. At first, Diana thought it was some kind of animal or bird, but the windows were on the second floor, and the knocking was rhythmic and intensified with each blow. The girl thought that it might be a ghost, and grabbing a candlestick, she carefully approached the window. Diana lit the candles and began waving them around, trying to scare the ghost away from her bedroom windows. Then she plucked up courage and looked out the window, and from surprise could not utter a word. It was Albert. He was holding onto the balcony railing and asked if he had scared Lady Diana. The girl opened the balcony doors and, coming out to him, said that naturally she was scared, and then asked how he got here because it was very high here. The Duke replied that it was not difficult for him, although he had broken his spells, and Lady Diana would need to strengthen her security. In each generation of Raffaello, one swordmaster appeared who could divide mountains and seas with his abilities, and this time it was Albert. Diana asked if the Duke managed to talk to Charlene. Albert replied that there was no time for this, because Diana's brother very quickly took the girl into the room. He then added that Charlene did not want to talk to anyone today and asked not to disturb her. From Albert's look, Diana thought that he felt guilty because he couldn't stay with his sister today. She told the Duke that he shouldn't think about it, because at that moment he did the right thing, made the right choice. Thanks to his patient behavior at the ball, his sister Charlene remained safe. Diana thanked the Duke for his patience and said that Charlene probably thought the same. The next moment, Albert came so close that Diana was a little scared. She tried to find a reason in the Duke's behavior and thought that she probably said something wrong. Albert turned Diana's back to him and, placing his hands on her shoulders, reminded her of his request that she not run away from him. And then Diana felt his gentle hands touching her shoulders and began to move lower and lower along her body. A moment later, Diana felt the Duke's body on her back, and a chill ran through her entire body. She turned to Albert, embarrassed, and asked why he had come here. He replied that he was simply worried whether Lady Diana had made it home well. The Duke then added that he had been waiting for her for almost an hour and regretted that he could not see her off. Diana noticed that Albert began to move a little further away from her. Apparently, he noticed that the girl was embarrassed and scared. The Duke replied that he had not told Lady Diana the most important thing. Diana replied that if Albert means his illness, then we need to agree on all the details in advance. It will be more convenient. Then, the girl reminded the Duke that she had asked Fernando to get information about magical poisoning and that she would probably have to visit the alchemist in the near future. Albert asked when Diana was planning the trip because he also wanted to go with her. The girl replied that she was going to go tomorrow after they spent time together with her friend because she always visits Charlene after something happens to her. The Duke thought for a moment and replied that in this case, Lady Diana would not be able to escape unnoticed. The girl replied that she would ask her brother to pay more attention to Charlene, and then Diana could leave calmly. Albert looked at the girl closely and said when she meant brother, did she mean Andrew Valerian? When Diana replied that she really meant her brother Andrew, she noticed how Albert's face changed because he was obsessed with his sister Charlene. The Duke added that he hopes Andrew is a responsible, serious person who can be trusted with his sister Charlene. Diana thought that this might be a test for her brother, and decided to quickly send Albert home and teach Andrew good manners and how to behave. She advised the Duke to be careful and hastily bade him farewell. Albert asked why Lady Diana wanted to send him away so quickly, and she replied that they had discussed everything and it was already late. Diana replied that she was simply worried about Albert because it was so dangerous to walk in the dark. The Duke replied that before he left, he would like to hear the answer to the question he asked Lady Diana at the ball. Diana said the Duke seemed to be referring to Prince Elvis. She added that she doesn't remember the details of that situation well, because at that moment she was very worried that the Duke would be exposed. Albert replied that in that case the lady should not bother herself with memories of this evening. The Duke added that they would see each other tomorrow, and smiling slightly, headed towards the terrace. Diana noticed his smile and, standing on the balcony, wondered if he had really come in the middle of the night just to ask her about this. Elvis stood on the roof of the palace and looked thoughtfully at the night sky. A minute later, he called his servant Kadeen, and he said that he was ready to carry out any of his instructions. The prince, without turning around, ordered the servant to get all the information about one person, and his name is Nathan Diego. Elvis recalled the ball, which ended a couple of hours ago, and thought that it was an ordinary and boring event. Until I met a bright girl with red hair. Her behavior was noticeably different from other ladies, and no matter how tenderly he looked at her, she did not react to it. During the conversation, although the girl behaved directly, it was noticeable to him that she seemed to be a little cunning. At that moment, when Diana's companion took her hand, Elvis thought that he looked very much like Albert Raffaello, whom the emperor wanted to marry his daughter. On the other hand, perhaps it's not him, but just a guest who looks like him. But Sir Diego's look was exactly the same as Duke Albert's. If it's not the Duke, then it's a big relief for Elvis, but if it's him, then it will be to his advantage anyway. The next morning in the Valerian family, as usual, began with a joint breakfast. The mother exclaimed that lately she has been learning how to arrange bouquets. It helps her put her body and mind in order. Smiling, she turned to her husband and asked if perhaps he would also like to try this activity. The father stroked her cheek and said that he did not need to do this, because he already had one beautiful flower. Diana looked at her parents and wondered if she would really be the same as her mother, who would also tenderly hold the hand of her future husband. She will also smile and laugh at his jokes. Then he will raise his head and look tenderly at his gray eyes. Diana suddenly blushed and couldn't understand why she was introducing the Duke now. She instantly jumped up and grabbed her head. It seemed to her that she was losing her mind or going crazy. And then she noticed with what surprise and concern those around her were looking at her. Trying to somehow justify herself, Diana said that she felt strange, perhaps because of her parents' conversation or because Brother Andrew had met Charlene. The mother looked at her daughter and said that perhaps her behavior was caused by loneliness because she was not dating anyone. Diana tried to object, saying that she was not alone, but that her mood had just changed for a moment. Her father said that this feeling of loneliness would definitely pass as soon as she met a real man, but only one just like him. Diana replied that she would listen to her father's advice just to get away from this topic. A minute later, the parents had already forgotten about their daughter's mood and, standing in their arms, shared compliments with each other. Today, Diana had 2 meetings planned, so after breakfast, she took an umbrella and was about to leave the house, but Andrew caught up with her. The brother asked if his sister was going to see Charlene, but she replied that she had completely different plans. When Andrew asked him to say where she was going and whether she could take him with her, Diana sharply replied that she was not obliged to report to him about her personal affairs. First of all, she decided to look at the alchemist and, after meeting Fernando, see her friend Charlene. And then she saw the Duke outside the gate, who said hello and said that Lady Diana was a little late. Diana looked at Albert and remembered the thoughts that visited her at breakfast, but immediately tried to get rid of them, because this was the brother of her best friend and, in the future, her daughter-in-law. But she continued to look at the Duke and thought that she had really gone mad. Albert handed the note to Diana, saying it was from Charlene. The girl read that Charlene was waiting for her in 3 hours near the largest tree. Before Diana had time to ask if the Duke had arrived only to deliver the note, he instantly picked up the girl and put her on the horse. A second later, they were already rushing towards the house where the alchemist lived. Albert sat so close that Diana felt his strong chest and strong arms. She felt awkward from this proximity. She decided to move a little further away and began to lose her balance. The horse galloped so fast that the girl flew off it and began to fall down. The Duke instantly reached out his hand in time to grab Diana. Another second and the irreparable would have happened, but thanks to Albert, Diana was saved. He said, "Is the girl really so unpleasant that she was ready to fall off the horse?" Then the Duke jumped to the ground and said that there was only one horse, and he was giving it to the lady, and he himself would try to get there as quickly as possible in another way. Diana looked after him and rushed towards Fernando's house. Having reached the alchemist, Diana had already received the coveted bag, but Albert was still not there, and the girl began to worry. Finally, the Duke appeared at the door, and Diana rushed to meet him, but he ignored her and immediately turned to Fernando. Diana was surprised and thought because Albert never did this, unlike her. The Duke asked Fernando how long the energy charge could be extended. The alchemist replied that it was about 4 hours, but this time he gave a new portion and therefore cannot say for sure. Albert said that it turns out that there is no way to use the sedative yourself without resorting to the help of Lady Diana. Fernando replied that so far they had coped well with the Duke's illness together, and he would not advise resorting to dubious other methods, because Albert was his only test subject. Diana could not understand what she had done wrong, because before the Duke was constantly looking for an opportunity to see her, but now he wants to increase the time between their meetings. She wanted to ask Albert about this, but he asked her the question first. The Duke asked if Lady Diana really found his touch so unpleasant. Diana looked at Albert. She really wanted to say that everything was completely wrong. From his touch, she felt coolness, and if it were some kind of object, she would not want to let it go from her hands. The Duke replied that her long silence spoke for itself, and she did not have to answer. Diana was afraid to miss the moment to talk to Albert and tried to say that this was not the case at all. The Duke bowed politely, saying that in future he would be careful not to touch the lady again, and regretted that Diana had not said so earlier. Turning away from the girl, he apologized for thinking only about himself and his feelings. Diana thought that if at that moment when she almost fell from her horse she had not allowed the Duke to touch her, then trouble might have happened. The Duke looked at Diana again and said that she had no need to force herself to touch him. Having arrived at Raffaello's house on 2 horses, one of which was taken from the alchemist, Diana saw that Charlene and Andrew had approached them, and his brother was clearly dissatisfied with something. He looked at his sister and said that she seemed to say that she had something to do. Could it really be Sir Diego? Diana replied that they met by chance on the road, and Albert tried to confirm this. He added that the sun was very bright today, and he was looking for a suitable umbrella for Lady Diana, so he was late. Diana accepted the umbrella and, turning to the Duke, quietly showed a gesture that indicated that he had come up with a great idea. Charlene looked at her friend with a smile and suggested that instead of shopping, all 4 of them should go on horseback to a place where they had not been before. The Duke tried to suggest that he ride on horseback with Lady Charlene. Andrew looked at the Duke in bewilderment and said that this was impossible and unnecessary because her fiancé was nearby. Albert answered whether Andrew was really inviting him to ride a horse with Lady Diana. He added that if he did this, then bad rumors might spread about Lady Diana. Diana understood that only recently Albert tried to touch her hand all the time, and now he was moving away, not wanting to go together. And then Charlene said that everyone should go to a beautiful place. She has a great option that will suit all 4 of them. A minute later, Diana and her friend were riding on the same horse, heading to the place where Charlene had indicated. Arriving at a beautiful clearing, Charlene said that this place was called Sunset Hill, and she often visited here as a child. She added that she always wanted to return here with the people who are dear to her heart. Andrew looked around and told Charlene that from now on they would come here often together. The girls smiled at Andrew and said that the 4 of them could come here as well. Charlene then added that men can now get off their horses and walk around this beautiful place. Andrew replied that he was going to do it as soon as possible anyway, because people were staring at them all the way. Charlene smiled and replied that from the outside they looked like bosom friends. Then she suggested finding a place in the clearing where the 4 of us could have a great picnic. Andrew, trying not to show his displeasure to the Duke, tried to stay near Charlene as much as possible, complimenting her and hugging her. And Diana at this time began to lay out the food on the spread-out blanket. At this moment, there was a slight summer breeze, but it was enough to spoil the piece of cake. Albert managed to put his hand on the edge of the blanket so that it would not spoil the dish. Diana placed her hand on the Duke's and thanked him. Albert suggested getting everything ready quickly so we could start dessert. After a while, everything was ready, and Diana said she didn't think it would take any longer than she expected. She thought to herself that it was all because of the couple who did nothing and did not help. Diana looked at the Duke, who stood 2 steps away from his sister's Andrew. It was clear from his gaze that he was ready to rush in and separate this couple at any cost. Diana felt a little sad as she remembered the moment when the Duke told her not to go near him again. There was a time when she gave her friend and brother a lot of advice, and then she could only watch them from the side. Diana endured for a long time, but it seems that now this patience has come to an end. In aristocratic circles, the Valerian family was known for its hot temper. Diana tried to approach the Duke and talk, but he constantly moved away from her at a certain distance, and she could not stand it. And when she said that she would like to apologize, Albert stopped and looked in her direction. He asked what the girl was going to apologize for, and she replied that she was wrong. Diana walked closer to the Duke and said that she had been avoiding him because she found him attractive. but she felt awkward when someone as handsome as Albert approached her. The Duke looked at the girl and replied that he did not expect to hear such a thing from Lady Diana. Looking at Albert, the girl really wanted to say that she was embarrassed when the Duke approached her, and she began to experience some vague feelings towards the man. But Diana was stopped by the fact that her brother Andrew and Charlene were already engaged, and double matchmaking was not very welcome in aristocratic circles, because marriages were created for this purpose in order to increase their power and territory. She told the Duke that although she had a certain sympathy for him, she could not perceive him as a man. Diana added that she would try in the future to behave in such a way as not to give rise to any further misunderstandings. She understood how difficult it was to be avoided, even with good intentions. But again, it was all very exhausting. It gave no rest. Diana suggested that the Duke should not avoid each other and, adhering to the framework, remain friends. Albert was silent for a while, and then replied that he agreed to treat her as before, and noticed that she was the first to suggest not running away from each other. He came closer to the girl and said that he would make sure that she remembered her words. And then Diana again experienced that strange feeling, because it turns out that with this conversation, she dug her own grave. And to get out of this slightly awkward situation, Diana told the Duke that it was already starting to get dark, and besides, Charlene might think strange about them. Albert asked why the lady had this concern, and Diana replied that they simply did not have a very serious conversation for too long. Then Charlene looked out from behind the tree and said that she called them, but they didn't come down, so she herself came for them. Minutes later, all four of them were sitting on a blanket with all sorts of goodies and picnic snacks laid out on it. Then Diana looked at Charlene and, without taking her eyes off, asked if she wanted to tell her something. The girl replied that no, but immediately fell silent, feeling awkward because her friend continued to look at her. Seeing how awkward his sister was feeling, the Duke offered her a cookie, saying that it contained very tasty raisins, which he loved. Andrew grinned and said, "How can Sir Diego offer a girl such a low-grade dish with raisins, which are called demon nipples?" Then Diana intervened and said that not both of them acted like little children in kindergarten. Charlene turned to her friend and whispered quietly in her ear that she wanted to talk to her alone now. Moving away so that the men could not hear them, Charlene told Diana that she wanted to tell her something about Sir Diego. The friend added that she had been planning to do this for a long time, but never dared. And now at the picnic, she decided to tell Diana everything. The girl was worried whether Charlene would now tell her something that she shouldn't know. Charlene gathered her courage and, with difficulty finding words, told her friend that in fact, Sir Diego was her brother. Diana did not understand how to behave in this situation, either show surprise or simply remain silent. And Charlene added that she didn't tell her friend not because she didn't trust her, but was simply looking for the right moment to tell her everything. Diana took her friend by the hands and said that everything was fine, because she knew about it from the very arrival of the Duke. Diana added that although many years had passed, she still could not help but recognize in Sir Diego the Duke, whose portraits she had seen in childhood. She told Charlene that a lot had happened lately, so she was waiting for her friend to tell her everything herself. Charlene asked if Diana could honor her request and still address her brother as a knight. Diana smiled, nodded her head, and said that they should have fun today. Andrew fidgeted all the way back, and when he arrived at the house, he told Sir Diego that he had been a terrible traveling companion. Jumping almost on the move, the Duke replied that he completely agreed with him, so he was leaving first. Approaching the door, Charlene asked if Diana had noticed that there was such a tense relationship between them, and the girl replied that men would sooner fight than make friends. Perhaps Andrew would change his mind about the knight if he found out who he really was, but Charlene said he shouldn't be trusted with such secrets. Diana thought that if men continue to treat each other this way, their relationship will completely deteriorate, and this could lead to negative consequences. She decided that first she needed to deal with one of the parties and told her friend that she and her brother would go home, since it was already late. Andrew opened his arms for a hug and, saying that he wanted to say goodbye to Charlene, headed towards the girls. But as soon as he approached, Diana abruptly grabbed his tie to stop him. She told her brother that she knew these goodbyes and was not going to wait for him for another couple of hours. Diana sternly told Andrew to go back to the horse and wait for her there. Andrew did not argue with his younger sister and stepped aside, while Albert asked what Lady Diana was talking about with Charlene on the hill. Diana did not lie to Albert and replied that Charlene revealed that Duke is her brother. Albert became worried and asked if the girl had let slip about his illness because his sister knew nothing about it. Diana replied that she did not say anything to Charlene, and then added that perhaps in the future her friend would be offended by her for this. The girl added that she still gives priority to her friend, but there is a limit to everything, especially patience. Then Diana turned to the Duke and said that she would save him, no matter what the cost, and would keep their secret a secret for as long as necessary. Albert looked at Diana and asked if she was really willing to go to great lengths to save him. The girls became so embarrassed by the Duke's gaze that she covered her face with her hands. She turned around and was about to run to the horse where her brother was waiting, but the Duke managed to grab Diana's hand, squeezed it tightly, and said that he would trust her and would wait. Albert looked after the running girl, but then something made him turn to the windows of the house. Charlene was standing on the balcony, and the Duke was afraid that his sister could not only see something, but also hear something. The girl knew her brother very well since childhood. He hated it when someone touched him. Charlene put her hands on the glass and was surprised, not understanding what was happening there. She saw the behavior of her brother and friend and really wanted to hear what they were talking about. Charlene moved away from the window and caught herself thinking that lately she had been seeing Albert and Diana together very often. Seeing her brother and friend holding hands, she remembered that this had already happened at a ball in the Imperial Palace. The next day, early in the morning, Andrew asked Diana what she was whispering about with the knight, and she indignantly replied, "Since when did he begin to be interested in her personal affairs?" The brother said that if she reacted this way to his question, it means she liked the knight, but he would not allow this to happen. Diana replied that her brother himself should understand that his thoughts and words are funny and absurd. But seeing the look of mistrust in Andrew's eyes, Diana could not stand it and said that she was just saying goodbye to Sir Diego, and her brother was following her like a dog. Then a squabble began between them. The brother was indignant at how his sister could call him a dog, and she shouted in response why he had been torturing her since the morning. Their quarrel lasted for some time, and when Andrew went to Diana, the maid was already running. After catching her breath, Daisy reported that the lady had received a letter from the Imperial Palace from Prince Elvis. The letter said that he regretted Lady Diana's early departure from the ball and would like to invite her to the palace along with her companion and friend Lady Raffaello. But when Diana read in the letter that tomorrow the prince would send a servant, it no longer looked like an invitation, but like she had to obey. The next minute the girl grinned because the prince reminded her of a raccoon who was just as cunning and harmful. Diana gave the letter to the maid and asked her to bring her a cape. When Daisy asked if the lady was going to go somewhere, Diana replied that she remembered that she had some things to do. Diana stopped her horse near a small brick building that looked like an ordinary house. It was a cheap tavern for workers and a hotel for travelers, but it was known only to a narrow circle of people. In the hall, Diana heard empty, drunken chatter about how the princess ran into the hall during a ball in the Imperial Palace and shouted at her servants. At the other end of the room, the discussion was that the next ruler should be none other than Prince Elvis. Diana looked around the premises and finally found the one for whom she came here. The girl lifted her hood so that the man recognized her and quietly said that she had come to him with one request. It was Railwood, the owner of the hotel, and he said that if she needed anything, then everyone was busy. Rail was her friend and also the head of the most famous information guild called Owl. The girl repeated that she had come to him with a request, and the man replied that they could go to another place where no one would hear them. This happened at the moment when Diana had just begun to remember her past life, and while she was lying unconscious, it turned out that a gold mine had been discovered in the West, but she saw it in the novel. She thought bitterly that if she had remembered this earlier, she would have bought those lands, and if she used them correctly, she could have helped her brother in time. The novel said that the Imperial Palace announced a persecution of information guilds that incite people to revolt, and Rail, the head of the Sova Guild, was from an aristocratic family and was one of the first to know about it. In order to make friends with him, Diana used the fact that she moved into someone else's body and several times sold him information circulating among aristocrats. Approaching one of the offices, Rail opened the door and said that no one would hear them here, and it was good that Diana came, because he also wanted to talk to her. When they entered the office, the man said that his people were saying that lately they often see Diana in an alley near the laboratory of a mad alchemist who is studying the northern lands. He then added that he did not think that Lady Diana visited this place without some reason or purpose. Diana replied that he was right, and she really is there sometimes, collecting information about the northern lands, but nothing is known yet. As soon as she finds out something specific, she will definitely tell him about it. Rael said he doesn't rule out the possibility that it's related to Raffaello. The man added that Diana always starts to fuss when it might concern her brother or friend Charlene. Diana smiled and replied that this time she came for a slightly different question. The girl looked at Rael and asked him to tell her about Prince Elvis. The next morning, the prince sent a carriage as promised, and Lady Diana went to the imperial palace. The palace park looked very expensive, and it seemed as if all the statues in the world were collected here. Walking along the path, Diana suddenly heard someone calling out to her. The girl turned around and saw Duke Albert. Diana asked in surprise how he could find her. Albert replied that when he arrived here, he saw the lady turn into this part of the garden, and thinking that she might get lost, he followed her. After these words, the Duke headed down another path, and Lady Diana decided that she needed to follow him. The girl thanked the Duke for his concern and asked where Charlene was, because they were supposed to arrive together. Albert replied that his sister was walking in the garden, and Lady Diana need not worry about her. The girl asked if it was tactful that the Duke was now with her and not with his sister, to which he replied that Charlene herself sent him for Diana. Suddenly, the girl asked if something had happened to her friend Charlene, because she felt some kind of anxiety. The Duke turned around and asked in surprise what kind of feeling this is. Anxiety. And without waiting for an answer, he added that it turns out that his sister Charlene is much more mature than he thought. The Duke said that he was dissatisfied with the fact that time was passing so quickly, and it had nothing to do with his sister. The next second, Albert turned around and took Diana's hand, but she didn't pull it away because she was starting to get used to it. Suddenly, from these touches, everything around began to glow with aquamarine light. It turned out that the Duke had a piece of crystal in his hands, which he received from the alchemist. Diana looked at Albert, and he said that this way he would not lose the crystal. The Duke looked at the girl with his gray eyes and could hardly restrain his smile. Elvis politely greeted Charlene and Diana, and the girls saw that, in addition to the prince, Princess Deborah was sitting at the table. Elvis gallantly pulled back his chair and said that Lady Diana could sit here. Diana thanked the prince. She was flattered that he pointed to the seat next to him. Elvis added that all the animals living in the palace are locked in cages and Lady Diana need not worry. He then turned to Charlene and said that he had heard that his sister Deborah had behaved rudely at the ball. Charlene smiled sweetly and replied that everything was fine. He added that as an older brother, he would like to apologize for her behavior, and Deborah did not seem to even listen to him at this time. The princess tried to catch Diane's gaze with her eyes. Maybe it was because the girl saw her crying. Elvis turned to the princess and said that she needed to apologize for her behavior at the ball. Deborah was silent for a while, but then she finally looked at Charlene and apologized to her for that evening. Charlene smiled again and said that she had already forgotten about it. When everyone sat down and started eating, there was a general awkward silence at the table. The prince spoke first, telling the Duke that he had heard that Sir Diego was staying at Raffaello's estate. Albert replied that he was temporarily enjoying their hospitality. The Duke found this strange, since he had never told anyone where he was staying. Elvis apparently understood the bewilderment of his interlocutor and replied that he had not told him anything personally, but the knight was very famous in the north. When the prince added that he had heard about him from friends, Diana knew that this was a lie. Immediately after she visited Rael, a man was sent who obtained information by bribing one of those close to the prince, and he admitted that he had been given the task of finding out everything about Nathan Diego. Elvis then asked the Duke if he had any kind of relationship with Lady Diana, since they were at the ball together. At this unexpected question, Diana dropped her fork and apologized, while she wondered why the prince decided to drag her here. While the servant was changing the fork, the girl felt very awkward. Diana saw that the prince was looking at her, and she replied that they had a completely different relationship. It was just that at that moment, she did not have a partner, and Sir Diego agreed to become him for the duration of the ball. Elvis chuckled imperceptibly, and then asked if Lady Diana really had no acquaintances with whom she could go to the event. The next minute, he stood up and approached the girl at an almost indecent distance. Diana decided that the prince may not have been able to obtain some information, and is now trying to find out from her. The girl remembered how Rael said that an audit was also organized against Sir Diego. But just like the prince, it was not possible to find out much, since Diego was an orphan from a bankrupt aristocratic family. The only thing we managed to find out was that he lost his parents at an early age and moved to the north at a young age. Diana answered the prince that she did not have such acquaintances, and therefore she invited him. Elvis moved even closer and asked, almost in her ear, if he could ask Lady Diana a very personal question. Then he straightened his back and, standing a little further away, asked if she had a lover. Diana felt as if an ice bucket had been dropped on her, and she replied that she preferred to spend time with her family rather than be involved in a romantic relationship. The girl tried to smile and added that it seems that the time has not yet come for this, and she prefers to engage in self-development. Now Diana was already sure that the prince gave her a real test, and then suddenly he asked if Lady Diana really didn't have time and desire even for him. Elvis's behavior already resembled light flirting, because it's not for nothing that he pays so much attention to her. In 10 years, the prince will stage a rebellion and take the imperial throne, and if Diana starts a relationship with him, she will be sucked into this political whirlpool. If Elvis really has a sincere sympathy for her, then this will still cause problems in any case. The prince told Diana that not everything he said today was a joke. Charlene tried to grasp the essence of the conversation, but she was having trouble doing it. Albert behaved a little warily. He also did not fully understand what Elvis was driving at. And then the prince, noticing a bent fork in Albert's hands, said that he hoped that the palace was watching this. After all, it is customary to get rid of spoiled and rusty things. Albert looked at his fork and realized that he had bent it mechanically while listening to all this tense conversation. And then Elvis said that he wanted to ask Sir Diego something. Princess Deborah stopped eating and looked at her brother. Apparently, she was also very interested in this whole conversation. The prince looked at the Duke and asked if he liked Lady Diana Valerian. Without waiting for an answer, Elvis asked why Sir Diego had such a fierce look, to which he replied that he had faced death more than once while he was in the north, and perhaps this affected his look. Here, Albert said, if he told the prince that he had an interest in Lady Diana, would he be satisfied with this answer? Diana looked first at the Duke and then at the prince, and did not know how this tense conversation would end. Elvis told the knight that his answer would not suit him anyway. The girls silently watched the men's dialogue, and all three felt awkward. Elvis looked around at everyone present and suddenly laughed loudly. He then told the Duke that there was no need for Sir Diego to act so wary towards him. The prince looked again at the Duke, who had not even touched his food, and said that he could relax. When the hot food arrived, Elvis said that now everyone could move on to the main course. Diana looked at the prince and was unhappy that he was using her to test Duke Albert. After all, the Duke Raffaello that Elvis knew would have reacted with complete indifference to this whole situation. Since childhood, the Duke was famous for his strong character and inaccessibility. For a person who is not so easy to make friends to fall in love with a lady he doesn't know well, that would be very unlike him. Apparently, that's why he basically called her and Charlene in order to see how Sir Diego would behave. And Albert behaved with dignity during the conversation. Apparently, he figured out the prince's plan, otherwise he would not have reacted like that. Diana remembered the Duke's words to the prince that he might have an interest in Lady Diana, and even in the presence of Charlene. Charlene also behaved calmly, apparently. She also realized that her brother was behaving in such a way that the prince would not recognize him. And then Diana felt her heart pounding strongly, and an unpleasant feeling appeared inside. After the storm had passed, the remainder of the lunch hour passed in complete silence. The prince was the first to rise from the table, saying that he had business ahead of him, because he was helping in the management of a trade guild belonging to his maternal relatives. Then the princess stood up and said that since the meal was over, then they all had to go too. As everyone headed toward the exit, Deborah called out to Diana. She quietly apologized for her brother's behavior and the tense atmosphere at the table. The Duke noticed this, but Diana pretended as if nothing had happened. Already sitting in the carriage, she expressed her opinion that perhaps the princess was not as bad as she seemed from the outside. Charlene was indignant that her friend was wrong, because everyone saw perfectly well what happened at the ball. Diana replied that usually there are serious rumors about high-born persons, and not everything can be believed. Charlene indignantly asked if her friend was now on Princess Deborah's side. Albert silently looked out the window and wondered what kind of courage the princess had. These were probably the requirements of the emperor, and it makes no sense to accuse the still very young princess of something. Besides, Deborah suffered too. Of course, it was true that the princess bullied Charlene. But you can't say she's truly evil. But it was a mystery for the Duke. He did not know how Lady Diana would communicate with the prince in the future. Albert caught himself thinking that it was unpleasant for him to see Diana communicating with one of the other men. He couldn't help but look at her. And someday, perhaps, the day would come when these feelings would turn into his weakness and would not poison his life. The Duke thought it necessary to nip this in the bud before they became bitter enemies. But even in his imagination, he could not kill Lady Diana. Charlene looked at her friend and said that when the princess talked to Diana, she felt as if something was being taken away from her. Diana replied that no one and nothing could influence their relationship and separate them. Charlene looked into her friend's eyes and said that she loved her very much, and that's why she felt jealous when she communicated with someone. The Duke listened to the girl's conversation and understood that these were the words to describe this feeling. But the event that forced Albert to admit his feelings came faster than he thought. A few days before a certain acquaintance, a very important conversation took place at the Valerian estate. Mother persuaded Diana to go to one single meeting, because it was not necessary to meet. Besides, she herself said that she was lonely. Diana recalled that at about 10 years old, she liked one boy. These were boring ballrooms where adults talked to each other. Therefore, they often met and played together in the garden. The mother continued to insist that Diana go on at least one date, because she had so hard to get this option from Mrs. Houston. Baroness Houston was the best matchmaker in the world, who claimed that the girls she was able to introduce all married successfully. Diana was starting to get tired of this conversation and promised her mother that she would go on this date. A few days later, Princess Deborah was surprised to read an article in the newspaper about pandering and was surprised. The prince was no less surprised because Diana said that she was not interested in relationships. Charlene also managed to read an article about Diana's possible date and was upset that her friend did not tell her anything about it. She shared this with her brother, but Albert could not say anything because he did not know how to react to it. By this time, a lot of letters had already accumulated on the office table of the Valerian estate, and each of them contained an invitation to a date. Daisy said that there were already rumors about the mistress's dates, and Diana was indignant at why strangers always meddle in other people's personal lives. Taking one of the letters, the girl burned it, saying that some of them irritated her very much. When the letter was almost burned out, Diana said that she would go to the end, and she now needed to go out. The maid asked where the lady was going, and then added that they still had a lot of preparation to do. Had Lady Diana forgotten that she was not just Daisy? And then she added that they don't have time for walks, because the date will be in 2 days and they need to look perfect. But the next moment, Diana jumped out of the window and went somewhere barefoot. After some time, the girl, out of breath, stopped to catch her breath. She had difficulty finding an overgrown loophole in the fence that she had used as a child, but suddenly Brother Andrew appeared from behind, who said that he had closed this hole a long time ago when they grew up. When Diana got angry and said that her brother always ruins everything and he is of no use, Andrew got angry, saying, "How can she talk to him like that?" The girl replied that he is not much older than her. Andrew chuckled and said that it seemed like the time had come to call the parents and servants here. Before the girl had time to ask her brother not to do this, he had already started screaming at his mother. The next moment, Andrew fell in front of his sister, and the Duke stood behind him. Diana looked at Albert, and at first she could not understand what had happened to her brother. Out of surprise, the girl asked the question that came to her mind: had the Duke really come to see her brother? Albert replied, "Does he really look like a man who has nothing else to do?" Diana said if the Duke came to get treatment, then now is not the time, because she is going to Fernando's house. But Albert continued to persistently look at Diana. The Duke frowned. This frightened Diana very much, and she thought that he should leave now. To keep Albert's anger from getting worse, the girl tried to say that he was a very handsome man, and it seemed to be working. She added that when she first met Albert, she was initially afraid of his coldness, but now she knows that he is not like that at all. And if he had officially arrived in the capital, he would have long ago become the first handsome man. Diana tried to praise the Duke, saying that he is very caring and thinks a lot about his family. The Duke interrupted her and said that he felt that she was still afraid of him. Diana tried to justify herself by saying that she was afraid only at the beginning of their acquaintance. Albert came closer and, smiling, suggested starting all over again from this place. Diana looked at the Duke in surprise and replied that she did not quite understand what he meant. And then the Duke noticed that the girl was standing completely barefoot without shoes and sat down at her feet. He touched her feet, and Diana could not explain this stupid situation to him. Before the girl had time to come to her senses, Albert picked her up and told her to hold on tight. The next second, the Duke jumped incredibly high and landed softly on the other side of the fence. Albert said that the first thing to do was find a shoe store, because if Lady Diana walked around like that, she might get hurt. He asked the girl if she felt disliked from being in his arms, and Diana replied that she really liked it. But the girl immediately corrected herself and said that she liked the store that was located nearby across the road. In the behavior and words of the Duke, she felt some kind of slyness. In the shoe store, Albert put the shoes that he had chosen on the girl's feet. At this moment, Diana felt an incomprehensible feeling and felt like Cinderella. After some time, they were on the porch of the temple, and the Duke asked why they were here, because Diana was going to visit the alchemist. The girl did not tell Albert that Fernando had a request in the letter, which was among others related to dating. She simply told the Duke that the alchemist had asked for some holy water, and Albert replied that it was unlikely that they would give it to her, since it had come without warning. But then a maid came out onto the porch and said that Mr. Matthew was waiting inside. Only a few knew about his existence and his ability to predict the future. Matthew was above all religions and could be compared to a great priest. He was even called God's messenger. Diana knew that giving him a few boxes of holy water was an ordinary trifle. The Duke and Diana had to wait a little because at this time the blind prophet was always praying. As Matthew turned towards them, Diana apologized for possibly disturbing his prayer. The prophet said that everything is in order because he invited him himself, and besides, here you can talk in silence. Then the prophet added that he was not surprised that they came here together because he saw it in a dream. The Duke seemed to be hostile, saying that one should not throw around such words about prophetic dreams. He sees that the temple is poor, and parishioners are lured here specifically with such tricks. The prophet did not get angry at all. He just put his hand to his chest and said that the guest could think whatever he wanted. Diana looked at the prophet and thought that he was a real messenger of God. He did not cower even in front of the Duke. Matthew turned his head towards Diana and said that he had prepared what she asked for. He then added that he would not take any money from Lady Diana this time. And then Matthew said strange words that everything would not end today. Prophet Matthew belonged to the Moon Temple, which was not a main religion. And according to the plot, this fact was not in his favor. The prince's knights began to oppress small religions, and the prophet was captured. Diana understood that Matthew probably knew everything in advance, and in particular that Diana's circumstances will help him. The Duke looked at the prophet and Lady Diana and could not understand why they were smiling at each other. After receiving the box of holy water, Albert was impatient to leave and told the prophet that they were in a hurry. Matthew replied that it was enough for him to see Lady Diana, and then turned to the Duke and said that he should not be so wary because he felt everything. Diana thought it was her imagination at first, but she actually noticed dissatisfaction in Albert's behavior. The prophet understood that this was all due to jealousy and said that he was a priest and had no interest in marriage or romantic relationships. Then he added that since the guest came with his good friend, he could talk about his future. The prophet said that he usually does not offer something like this to other people, but for his sake, he will make an exception. Matthew looked at the Duke and said that he had seen something, and suggested that he continue to do everything as before. He then turned his head towards Diana and said that in time she would understand everything. Fernando proudly showed the crystal and said that he was able to make them with the help of the holy water they brought. The alchemist gave it to Diana and said that she must definitely use it, since he wants to see the result of its action. Then, with sadness in his voice, Fernando said that he regretted that they would not be able to see each other, because Lady Diana was getting married soon. He explained that he had seen an article in the newspaper about a possible wedding, and in this case, the knight would urgently have to find another bearer of fire. And then the Duke replied that what Fernando was afraid of would never happen. Diana clutched the crystal tightly in her hands and said that she was ready. The Duke approached the girl, extended his hand, and said that he was also ready to do her favor. Diana looked into Albert's eyes and the whole room was lit up with a bright blue glow. So the girl's usual life continued, and then the day of the date arrived. She walked into the coffee shop and said that she had made a reservation under the name of Lady Diana Valerian. The friendly waiter replied that he would be happy to see her off. Diana looked at him and was surprised to see that it was Rael, and then remembered that among the letters she received, there was a message from him. The letter said that Rael regretted that he did not know about Diana's desire to marry first. Then they could have sold this information at a very high price, and, if he had known about this earlier, he would have begun to act more boldly. Diana thought that she could have guessed about this earlier, as soon as she received the letter, that Rael, offended, followed her even here, with the opportunity to mock her. The girl remembered the photograph of Count Botan, which her mother had shown her, and decided that she would just look at him and immediately leave. The next second, someone called her name, and Diana turned around. It was Count Sebastian Botan, but for some reason he was very different in appearance from what she saw in the photograph. At first, the girl thought that Rael had deliberately brought another man to mock her. The man gallantly pushed back his chair so Diana could sit down, and she decided that perhaps she was mistaken. And then one of the legs of the chair stood on the hem of the dress, and it almost tore. Sebastian apologized for his awkward behavior and said that perhaps he was just too worried trying to please the girl. Diana tried not to be nervous and asked how long Sir Botan had been waiting for her. The Count replied that, to be honest, he had waited a long time, but for the sake of a date with such a beautiful lady, he could have waited longer. Diana was surprised by this answer because she arrived 5 minutes earlier. Rael approached and invited them to open the menu and choose dishes. Inside, she saw a note from Rael, which said that there were a lot of visitors today, but she did not understand what that meant. Diana said that there would be cream soup with calf meat, and Rael asked if one soup was really enough. The girl replied that in the morning she felt a slight discomfort in her stomach, and Sebastian immediately said that he had the same thing. Apparently, she was also worried before the meeting, like him, and did not sleep all night. Diana did not find the Count's self-confidence very pleasant, and because of the headache that appeared, the girl did not immediately understand that Rael's note meant that today not only he, but also other visitors were watching them. Displeased, Andrew asked Charlene why the knight was with them now. The girl, looking at the menu, replied that for safety reasons, she promised her brother to go everywhere with this knight. Albert, also closing his menu, replied that he would tell the Duke everything about Andrew's dissatisfaction. Then Charlene intervened and said that if they were spying on someone else's date, then they needed to be quiet, and especially not quarrel. When the men calmed down a little, Charlene wondered if Albert really liked Diana so much that he even agreed to follow her. She looked at her brother and remembered the moments when she saw them together with her friend. Charlene initially thought that if this was true, then if they separated, it might affect her friendship with Diana. But then I reassured myself that this was a vain worry, because my brother always valued what he had. After all, even as a child, Albert tried to mend the blanket he used to cover himself with, and still keeps it in his chest. Charlene was already beginning to hope that they would be together, and dreamed that all 4 of them would go on double dates. And suddenly she heard how, at the next table, the Count accused Diana of an indecent lifestyle, calling her a cunning woman who relies only on her appearance. He said that if she does not attend banquets, she is probably different from other ladies. But in his opinion, she seemed exactly the same, and there was nothing to see except her face. Charlene turned to her table for a moment and saw that neither her brother nor Andrew were there. Both men stood with swords near the Count and threatened that he would pay for his words. Just a few minutes ago, Diana listened to how the Count praised himself, saying that most of the lands belonged to his family, that he really loved saving money, and was sure that they were suitable for each other. Sebastian claimed that he had such an elegant appearance that it made the hearts of many girls tremble, but he was looking for exactly one who would be on the same level as him, so he refused everyone. Diana tactfully nodded her head at his words, and thought that he was very confident and talked too much. The Earl said that he had finally made his choice and was ready to begin an official relationship with Lady Diana. Diana turned away a little and said that the Count deserves better, and perhaps he will meet someone better than her. Sebastian responded with bewilderment that his money and her beauty could be the best match. The girl smiled slightly and replied that she had plenty of money and did not need it. This answer finally angered the Count, and then insults followed against Lady Diana. The Count, with swords at his throat, just had time to ask who they were. Charlene quickly sat down next to Diana and asked, since when did her friend hang out with such uncouth louts? Andrew pressed the weapon to the Count's throat and introduced himself as Lady Diana's brother, and then added that all his words would be conveyed to the head of the Valerian family. And then Diana asked everyone to stop and explain what the 3 of them were doing here. In the Valerian estate, conversations and raised voices did not stop until the night. Miss Houston tried to beg forgiveness for suggesting such a candidate for a date, but this could not be, because all her candidates had been carefully checked. The Valerian family did not ignore this, and a claim was filed in court against Count Sebastian Boten. Later, Diana told over tea that thanks to Charlene and the knight who served their family, she was able to get out of this situation. The parents asked who this knight was, and Andrew replied that he was guarding Lady Charlene by order of her brother. And suddenly, the mother suggested inviting this knight to dinner and treating him to delicious food. The whole family looked at their mother in surprise, but she only said that everyone should find time for his visit tomorrow. To the amazement of the servants, Diana had already been sitting on the porch since the morning, because she had been thinking about the Duke's visit all night and could not sleep. The girl thought that Albert was hiding his identity, but yesterday he committed such a dangerous act. Diana read an article in the newspaper about yesterday's incident, in which, thank God, the Duke was not mentioned, and it seemed to her that, after all, it was the work of Rael. Suddenly, a stranger in a hood sat up to her and asked what she was reading with such interest. Frightened, Diana jumped up, and the servants were already rushing towards her to drive the stranger out. They ordered the lady to urgently come into the house, and Diana, recognizing Albert in the stranger, said that everything was in order, and this was her acquaintance. Diana saw the blood on the Duke's face and hands and tried to quickly take him away from the servants. Walking into the garden with the Duke, she asked why he was wounded, and he replied that he was simply giving a warning. Diana asked excitedly who Albert had beaten or if something worse had happened. The girl reminded that the Duke should not attract attention to himself and expose himself to danger so as not to be recognized. The Duke replied that he did everything cleanly and punished everyone except the scoundrel. After all, there is no better way to punish a person than to show him reprisals against those who protect him. Diana asked why Albert intervened in this matter personally, putting himself in danger. The Duke replied that he would never allow anyone or anything that belonged to him to be harmed. Diana replied that no stolen item could be so valuable that the Duke would expose himself to great danger. Albert asked in surprise if the lady was really worried about him, and the girl replied that she was. The Duke replied that he was pleased with the girl's concern, and perhaps he would sometimes do such things to experience this feeling. The girl replied that he was saying terrible words, because she was worried about him not only now, he shouldn't think about that. She put on a stern expression and said that next time she would tell Charlene everything, but Albert, without listening to her, asked again if she had really been worried about him before, and the girl realized that she had again blurted out something unnecessary. To quickly change the subject, Diana reminded the Duke that he was invited to an official dinner. Seeing the Duke's surprised look, Diana explained that Charlene and he, or rather Sir Diego, had been invited to dinner in gratitude for yesterday's action. The Duke looked at the girl and said that in that case they would see each other at dinner. Returning to the estate, Albert urgently needed to change clothes before Charlene saw him in this form. But then, as luck would have it, the sister came in and said that she would not ask why her brother was in this form, but would ask him only one question. Charlene looked at Albert and asked how he felt about Lady Diana. She added that she needed to know what he thought of her and who she was to him. The Duke stood silently in his bloody shirt in front of his sister. The next day, Charlene and the Duke arrived at the Valerian estate together. Once everyone was gathered around the large table, lunch started off fairly smoothly. Andrew asked the Duke to step aside, and then said that of course he could have done it alone, but still he was grateful that he stood up for his sister's honor. Albert extended his hand to him and said that there was no need to thank him, because he did what a real knight should do. The girls saw their brothers and sighed with relief that their quarrels would finally be over. Charlene told her friend that finally the four of them could safely go for walks. Then Andrew asked Charlene if she could go somewhere with him, and she asked if it was just the two of them. Andrew was a little embarrassed and said that there was a gift for her, and perhaps it had already been delivered. The girl replied that, of course, she would go with him, but for some reason at that moment she turned to Diana and winked at her. They walked away, leaving the Duke and Diana alone. The girl looked at Alberto and was surprised that he was not trying to follow them, and then said that it seemed that her brother no longer bothered him so much. The Duke replied that his sister offered him one deal, and now he is considering whether to agree or not. Then he suggested returning to the balcony and continuing lunch. After some time, Charlene and Andrew returned, and the girl was holding a huge bouquet of flowers. Approaching the table, Andrew decided to joke, saying that he himself would not understand where Charlene was and where the flowers were. Diana was surprised, and at the same time glad that the Duke was acting so calmly. Andrew turned to Charlene and said that he gave this bouquet for a reason. He wanted to tell her something. Andrew plucked up courage and continued, saying that after what happened with Diana, he was afraid that Charlene might go north with the knight, and there she would meet a young man and marry him. Therefore, he decided to personally go north and obtain permission to marry from her brother. And then he got down on one knee, handed Charlene a box with a ring, and asked if she would marry him if permission was received. Everyone froze, waiting for an answer, but Charlene was silent. Andrew got up from his knee, apologized to Charlene, and said that he could not resist and was in a hurry. Diana looked at what was happening with regret, because she knew how difficult it was for her brother to say such words. For the Valerian family, the North is an environment completely contrary to their nature, and his words meant that he was willing to risk his life for Charlene. Charlene replied that her words did not mean that she was refusing him. Then the Duke stood up from the table and told Andrew that he did not need to go north. Andrew replied that if the knight offers to convey information through him, then this does not suit him, because he himself personally wanted to talk with Duke Raffaello. Albert said that this is why Andrew can tell him everything, because he is Duke Raffaello. Andrew replied that he had seen the family portrait, and Sir Diego did not look at all like the Duke. Even if he wore a wig, it was impossible to change the color of his eyes. He added that this knight's stupid joke was completely inappropriate. He was very secretive, and for this reason, Andrew did not like him at all. The next moment, his anger crossed all boundaries, and Andrew summoned fire with his abilities. Diana instantly covered her friend and screamed at her brother to stop immediately. The Duke, engulfed in flames, instantly drew his sword. But it seems that this did not stop Andrew, and he only intensified the flames. A real battle of ice and fire began. The next second, Andrew saw that same legendary ice sword. This was the sword technique of the Raffaello family that even cut through magic. Having destroyed the fire and put away the sword, the Duke asked if Andrew now believed him. Things changed at Raffaello's estate, and at some point Andrew called the Duke his brother. He seemed to be trying to please the Duke and even brought 30-year-old wine. Albert heard Andrew suddenly call him brother and was very surprised by this. At that moment, Diana came to the estate, and a surprised Charlene asked her why Andrew was acting so strangely. She added that she was afraid that something might happen and they would fight again. Diana replied that they were at Raffaello's estate, so nothing would happen and her friend could be calm. She turned to Charlene and said that although her brother didn't like Andrew, she was sure he wouldn't hurt him. She then added that they could safely leave the men alone and do their hair. The Duke sat on the sofa and thought that as soon as Andrew found out who he really was, he began to behave completely differently. When Andrew walked into the girls' room, Diana asked if there was any progress in their relationship. Andrew sighed and said not really. It looks like the Duke still doesn't trust him. Charlene looked at him sadly and asked if he could talk to her now. Diana realized that now it was worth leaving them alone and went outside. After some time, the girl felt that the sun was shining too brightly. She covered her face with her hand and decided that it was better to return to the house. Suddenly, the Duke appeared nearby and he asked if the lady was hurt, and Diana replied that she was just covering herself from the sun. Albert removed the girl's hand and placed his palm on her forehead. Diana felt a familiar coolness and, thanking the Duke, said that everything was fine now. The girl added that she was going to leave, and Albert replied that he would accompany her to the carriage. Diana wanted to thank the Duke, but then he said that he could walk her home. The girl hastened to answer that there is absolutely no need to bother herself with this. She will get there herself. Diana quickly wished the Duke a good day and headed towards the carriage. Albert didn't answer, he just thought her behavior was funny. Prince Elvis read the newspaper with interest, especially the article which exposed the character and conduct of the Earl of Boughton. A minute later, he called some servant and ordered him to immediately deal with this count. The prince asked what new things had been learned about Sir Diego. The servant replied that he contacted all the information guilds in the capital, and only one managed to obtain information, and a portrait of this knight as a child was received. He showed the prince a portrait and said that the knight came from a bankrupt aristocratic family. His parents died of illness when he was just born. Elvis said that he was very disappointed with this meager information because he wanted to show his best side to the emperor. The fact is that the emperor tried several times to send spies to keep an eye on the Duke, but most of them either died on the way, or all contact with them was lost. Even if someone managed to get to the northern lands, it was almost impossible to get out of there. The prince told the servant that he had sent one man to the north, but no news had been heard from him for a whole month. Perhaps something had happened to him. The servant replied that there was a magical device for this case, but now they could not use it since there was no energy left in the crystals. Elvis replied that tomorrow he was going to meet his uncle and get the crystals himself. When the Duke first arrived in the north, he thought that the harsh living conditions would quickly break him, as happened to other visitors. However, at some point the Northerners began to see him as an irreplaceable person, with the exception of one person. Due to the Duke's departure, all matters were transferred to Assistant Eric, but there seemed to be too much to do. The real Sir Diego said that he too would do well to wash himself. The assistant replied that all the inconveniences should be blamed on the gentleman who had left. Sir Diego replied that, on the contrary, he was grateful to him. If not for the Duke, he would have remained starving on the street. The assistant was also aware of the secret agreement between the Duke and Sir Diego. Having received the Duke's approval for the marriage and Charlene's consent, Andrew was as happy as a child and thought that the wedding ceremony should be held in a more beautiful place than where the engagement took place. When Diana asked why he was so noisy, Andrew replied that he had come to brag that he had a date today. Then the brother asked what Diana was going to do today, and the girl replied that she was planning to go to her friend. Andrew looked at his sister in surprise and asked if she really had any friends besides Charlene. Rael was an excellent friend, but, as it turned out, until a certain time. No sooner had Diana entered the tavern than he offered his advances, as well as his feelings, to which the girl responded with a sharp refusal, saying that she did not come here for that. And the workers only encouraged him to act more boldly, or one of them would introduce the lady to his nephew. Rael told the girl that there were too many eyes and ears here, and suggested going to a nearby cafe, which is run by an acquaintance of his. Going outside, he joked that this was their first date, and Diana snatched his notebook and wrote something in it. When she showed Rael the torn piece of paper, there was only one question: whether he was the culprit of the published article. Rael grinned and replied that he set it all up, and their next conversation continued with the help of notes, from which Diana learned that Rael had received an order from the Emperor to find out everything about Nathan Diego. Rael, of course, carried out the order, but having received the money, he sold false information. Fortunately, he visited the Prophet Matthew in advance. Then, having made a fake portrait, he sold it to the Emperor. Diana sighed with relief, hoping that the Emperor did not find out the truth, and patted Ryla on the head. The guy said that Diana owed only 20 coins for her services, out of old friendship. The girl replied that she had no money with her at the moment. Rael said that in that case, they could just have lunch together. Having ordered almost all the dishes that were on the menu, he said that when he comes to someone else's establishment, he must try everything. And then Diana heard a very familiar voice, and it was the voice of her brother. She carefully turned her head and was surprised to see Andrew, Charlene, and the Duke enter the cafe. Albert complained to him about the fact that he constantly called him brother, and Andrew replied that the Duke was older than him. That's why he addressed him that way. Charlene advised them to be quieter in the restaurant and cafe, and was extremely unhappy that they only communicated with each other. When all three sat down at the next table, Diana felt great excitement. She told Rael that they needed to leave here quietly and asked him to discreetly look at the next table. He quickly took her hand and said that he knew where the emergency exit was. They tried to hide unnoticed, but Charlene still managed to notice them. After running several blocks, Diana said that she was very tired and wanted to go home. Rael asked if the girl could do him a favor and go to the store with him because he needed to buy something. He explained that this place is quite gloomy, and he is afraid to go there alone. Finally, Diana gave in and agreed to his whining. After some time, they stood in front of a building that looked more like an abandoned one, where they were doing something illegal. Rael, surprised by the girl, explained that the goods he needed could only be found here. Usually, crystals could be bought in official stores, and you could also provide your personal information. And here they could be purchased without any formalities and at a lower price. Diana suggested that perhaps they should hide their identities, and Rael replied that this would not be necessary since he personally knew the owner. The next moment, Diana was very scared as two hooded strangers approached her. One of them said that the lady easily recognized him as soon as she heard his voice. As soon as the stranger took off his hood, Diana recognized him as Prince Elvis. The prince looked at the girl and said that it seemed they were now in the same boat. Sitting in the same carriage with the prince and his entourage, Diana felt awkward. She had no idea that Elvis could be met in this place. The prince asked if there really was no need to give Lady Diana's acquaintance a lift. The girl responded positively, adding that if someone recognized him, trouble could happen. She could not imagine that the prince could destroy the Information Guild and kill all its members when he took the throne. When Diana plucked up the courage to ask the prince what he was doing in this place, the attendant said that he did not have to answer her question. But Elvis pointed to the man and said that he was his uncle. His name was Baron Claude de Ciro, and he was the head of the Merchant Guild. The Baron added that he sometimes accompanies the prince when he needs to explore the market. Elvis then said if he had answered Lady Diana's question, could he ask her the same thing? The girl was silent because she could not tell him the reason for her presence in this shop. But the prince did not wait for her answer but asked how she felt about him and whether he was really good. Then he added that he had read in the newspaper that Lady Diana had been wooed by Earl Botten. Could it be that the girl had rejected the prince for his sake? Diana again felt awkward and replied that she had never even imagined anything like that. But unforeseen circumstances had occurred. The rest of the journey passed in silence, but Diana constantly felt the prince's gaze on her. As the carriage arrived at Valerian's estate, the prince said that he would look forward to the next contingency. The next morning, Diana felt very ill, and Daisy said that the lady had a cold and was ill. The girl hoped for a speedy recovery, but the more time passed, the higher the temperature rose, and Diana slept all the time. The doctor examined Diana and said that in normal life, her temperature was elevated due to genetic characteristics. The worried parents asked whether ordinary medicines really could not help, and the doctor replied that this disease was associated with physical characteristics, and even the priests might not be able to cope. The girl lay in bed and thought, if it was so hard for her because of a simple fever, then how did the Duke feel in his illness? She woke up in the middle of the night due to extreme thirst, and suddenly saw her mother who had fallen asleep right on the edge of her bed. And then, looking around, she was amazed to see that the whole family remained with her. Knowing that they were worried about her, Diana wanted to cry. For a moment, she thought that she had lost her abilities due to illness, because she was very hot and the room was stuffy. The girl decided that perhaps they were all so hot and began to open the balcony door. Diana went out onto the balcony and took a deep breath of fresh air. A pleasant night breeze blew across her body and fluttered her hair. The next moment, the girl felt a slight coolness on her shoulders. She turned around and froze in amazement. It was the Duke. Diana decided that it was just a dream, and she really wanted to snuggle up to Albert. The girl hugged the Duke and laid her head on his chest. It seemed to her that she felt better. And then suddenly the pleasant coolness grew into an unbearable burning sensation inside. The Duke cupped her head with his hands and said that Lady Diana seemed to have a fever again and her temperature was rising. But the girl hugged Albert again, and she did not want to part with him even for a second. The Duke said that Diana's temperature was much higher than usual, and the girl replied that his temperature, on the contrary, was lower than usual. Diana said that a few minutes ago she was tormented by severe thirst, but now everything has passed. Then the girl asked if the Duke really felt as good after their treatment. Albert said that he was very worried about Lady Diana, lest she get worse. Diana smiled at the Duke and asked him to stay in his arms for a little longer. In the morning, the mother listened to Diana and said that if there were guests, they would definitely notice it, and the father added that if a stranger had entered the house, he or his brother would immediately know about it. Diana sighed and replied that it seemed like she had dreamed it all, and her mother said that because of the fever, dreams were confused with reality. Then she added that Diana's fever was not going down and she needed to call a doctor, but the girl said that it was just a cold. Andrew said that magicians never get sick like this, and everyone was worried about her and scared. After a second visit to the doctor, he said that it was difficult to determine its cause. Therefore, magicians and alchemists were convened and created complete chaos. They later rendered a verdict that it seemed that the body had physically failed due to the high consumption of mana. The mother looked at Diana in surprise and said that this was the capital, not a battlefield, and her daughter could not use so much. The girl assumed that during each treatment, much more mana was consumed than expected. Another day passed, but Diana had difficulty getting out of bed, and her brother constantly monitored her condition. Diana was surprised that her brother put off his date with Charlene in order to look after his sister. Diana smiled and said, "Is Andrew really that big already, and not a fool who is simply blinded by love?" This angered the brother so much that he slapped his sister on the cheek and shouted that he had always been an adult. Diana also got angry at Andrew and said how he could have hit his sick sister. The next second, Andrew felt someone's presence and turned around to see the Duke. At first he asked in surprise how the Duke was able to get into the room so silently, and then began to apologize stupidly, saying that it was a misunderstanding. And then Andrew noticed Charlene at the door, who also saw everything that was happening. The girl asked if maybe it was a joke, because Andrew couldn't do that to his sister. She then added that she thought that firebenders did not get sick, and Andrew replied that he and his family were also very surprised when they found out. He then talked about the doctor's assumptions that it was not a common cold. He added that the meeting of magicians and alchemists were sure that Diana had used up too much mana, which is why her temperature had risen. The Duke listened to the conversations, but it seemed that his thoughts were occupied with something else very important. Charlene whispered in Diana's ear that yesterday her brother was very worried about her condition. And at night he learned through someone the news that Diana was sick and immediately left the mansion. The girl's eyes were full of surprise, which means it wasn't a dream after all. She began to understand that all the caresses, hugs, and words of coolness turned out to be reality. But somewhere inside, she was still trying to convince herself that it wasn't true. She remembered that at some point last night she felt cold and decided to return to the house. But before leaving, she touched Albert's cheek, and he seemed quite real to her. The girl decided not to torment herself with guesses and directly asked the Duke whether he really came to her at night. The Duke looked at Diana and replied that he had indeed come to see her. In the next second, Diana simultaneously experienced two feelings, surprise and severe embarrassment. Then she pulled herself together and said that she did not remember at all how she got to the bed. The Duke replied that this was natural since Lady Diana fell asleep in his arms. Then he added that he felt very guilty before the girl. After all, he is the reason that Diana is now sick. The girl replied that it was not the Duke's fault because she herself volunteered to be the first to help him. And suddenly Albert said that for the sake of Lady Diana's health, they must stop all this. At that moment, Diana was horrified by what she heard, and she wanted to take the Duke by the hand. But Albert jerked his hand back and asked what the lady was going to do. Diana looked at the Duke and replied that she was going to treat him as before. The girl added that they both know that there is simply no other way. Albert tried to say that he could bear it. Diana replied that she knew very well how much the Duke needed this, because she herself had gone through this. The Duke replied that he would not allow Lady Diana's condition to worsen. Besides, how was she going to hide all this from her friend Charlene? It is possible that due to the high consumption of energy and mana, she may lose consciousness again. Diana replied that in any case, Albert should not blame himself for everything that happened. She added that this is all due to the fact that she simply does not yet know how to control her strength and energy. Diana looked at the Duke and said that she still needed to try again, and if she got worse, Albert would help her. The girl reminded the Duke that yesterday she felt so comfortable in his arms that she was even able to fall asleep, and today her temperature dropped a little. The girl held the crystal in her hands and told the Duke that thanks to it she felt better. Albert looked at Diana in surprise and asked if she wasn't scared. The girl replied that she had nothing to fear, because if something happened, the Duke would save her again. Diana placed the crystal in the Duke's palm and understood that at that moment they really needed each other. After some time, the girl smiled and said that the treatment procedure was over. But the next second, Diana realized that she was beginning to lose consciousness and feel very tired. But thank God the Duke managed to catch the girl in his arms. Albert said that Diana had absolutely no strength, and he himself would carry her to the bed. To fall asleep faster, he advised her to wrap herself in a blanket, and he headed for the exit. Diana reached out and asked if Albert could stay with her until she fell asleep. The Duke returned and, sitting on the bed, asked if he could take her hand. Diana agreed and said that this way she would fall asleep faster. Albert wished the girl sweet dreams and said that he would take care of her peace of mind. It was almost midnight when some kind of commotion began in the courtyard of the Raffaello estate. The stranger standing at the gate claimed that he was a knight of the north. The guards tried to drive the beggar away, telling him to beg in another place because he could not prove anything, since he did not have documents. Naturally, the stranger could not confirm his identity because he gave his documents to the Duke. Eric said that he would put on a helmet and only his eyes would be visible. Diego replied that as soon as he took out the sword, it could immediately be revealed. Then he sighed and added that a storm was raging, and monsters were beginning to attack in droves near the North Castle, leaving their habitats. The assistant said that due to such circumstances, it would be very difficult to send a letter. Nathan suggested using a magical communication device, and Eric replied that such a thing simply could not be bought in the North. Moreover, if a person from the North had this thing, the Emperor would immediately send people out. Then the assistant thought about it and said that the master's long absence might arouse suspicion, and a secret spy would learn about the Duke's disappearance. Diego said that he could pretend to be the Duke and pretend that he had left the castle. The assistant expressed concern that he had never been that far away and his disguise could be revealed. But Diego boldly replied that he was ready to accept this danger. He added that Eric doesn't have to worry about him and he will try to avoid the monsters as much as possible. And when checking an identity, he will use a bribe or come up with something else. The security continued to chase the stranger, and this only made the noise intensify. Suddenly, the Duke appeared and asked what the commotion was caused by the guards. Sitting comfortably on the sofa, Diego said he felt great after the shower. Albert asked what prompted Nathan to come here in this form, because it was all for a reason. The knight replied that he had come to escort the Duke north, and they must move out immediately. The Duke immediately thought about Lady Diana, because if he was not around, she might be in danger. Nathan saw Albert's confusion and asked if it was because the lady refused to go north. The Duke replied that he had not initially planned to take her there because there was not even a garden where you could walk. Diego said that in any case, the Duke needed to make a decision. One of the reasons for Albert's confusion was Andrew's sister's jealous attitude, and the second reason was Diana. He remembered the unusual sensation that he began to experience with Lady Diana, and his heart began to beat faster than usual. The Duke was silent, and then said that just one day, and they would go. Charlene picked a beautiful bouquet of flowers in the garden and decided to give them to her brother so that he could visit Diana. The next minute, the door swung open, and Charlene was surprised at what she saw next. Of course, she was not surprised by her brother's visit, but she was in amazement when the second man appeared. The man smiled and introduced himself, saying his name was Nathan Diego. Charlene remembered the day when her brother went north with him, but she didn't understand why he was here now. Charlene began to feel anxious and realized that she was about to hear something important. Albert said that today is the last day they are together, and tomorrow he will need to leave. Hearing this, Charlene dropped the bouquet of flowers and asked her brother why so suddenly. To some extent, she understood that her brother would someday go north, because he risked himself so much trying to meet her. After all, Albert had to disguise himself and hide his identity for this. Charlene began to cry and said that her brother promised that he would be here for a month, but now they don't know when they will see each other. Her parents tried to forbid Diana to go outside until she recovered, but the girl said that she was already completely healthy. But then Daisy appeared, and to stop this squabble, she showed Diana a bunch of gifts sent to her. The girl laughed and said that it turns out being sick is not so bad. Then the maid handed the lady an envelope, saying that it was from the prophet Matthew. Diana took the envelope and, disobeying her parents, went out into the garden. From the letter, Diana learned that the prophet wanted to visit her immediately, but unfortunately, in his situation this is impossible. He wishes her well-being and a speedy recovery. And suddenly the whole sky was covered with clouds and light rain began. Daisy quickly decided to take her mistress home, saying with annoyance that this should have happened as soon as she recovered. Going inside, the maid said that a guest had just arrived, and she led him into the living room. It was Rael. He smiled and said that Diana looked fine. The girl asked Daisy to close the door behind her and not let anyone into the living room. A little later, Rael said that he thought everything was much worse, because Matthew told him that he saw the girl crying. He then added that he was very worried about Diana and therefore began to follow her. But now Rael sees that the girl has recovered and is very happy about it. The next second, he stood up and said that he urgently needed to leave before the rain got worse. Diana indignantly said why he does this and believes that he has the right to follow her. Rael replied that he could not ignore the fact that Diana, who had never shown tears, was suddenly walking on the brink of life and death. To do this, he contacted his friends Adelaide and Wolfgang. Diana, as soon as she remembered these two from her past life, tried to keep them as a backup. Adelaide was the queen of mercenaries. A responsible and strong woman, everything always went smoothly for her. Wolfgang was a wandering poet, had no responsibility or nationality, and was also the complete opposite of Adelaide. There was nothing in common between them, and they were united only by a misunderstanding of each other. And no matter how high a personality they were, no matter how much money they had, these two always did what they wanted. Diana chose Adelaide to subjugate or suppress, and Wolfgang created only the songs he wanted, following her steps. Diana smiled thoughtfully and said that she had to get over it. The next morning, Diana said that she was going to go to the training ground and promised Daisy not to go beyond the estate. When Diana first realized that she had been reborn inside a novel, she lived on the training ground for days on end. At first, she only watched her father and brother train, without trying to train on her own. Then Diana began to train tirelessly until she decided to tie up the main characters. After finishing the training, Daisy praised the lady and said that she was excellent with weapons. Diana proudly replied that she was convinced that she had not yet become rusty or lost her skills. And suddenly, the girl heard a familiar voice and turned around. It was the Duke brought by Brother Andrew. The next second, Andrew pulled Daisy towards the exit, saying that they should be alone. Diana looked at Albert and was surprised that he was wearing armor. The girl smiled and asked if the Duke was comfortable in such attire in rainy weather. When Albert replied that he felt comfortable, the girl asked why he came alone without Charlene. The Duke replied that Charlene was in the carriage, and he only came in to say that he was leaving for the north. Diana was ready to hear anything, but not this. Albert added that the rain should stop and they might move out tomorrow. The girl lowered her head and asked again, which means the Duke will leave as soon as the rain stops. Albert replied that Charlene insisted that he come here and say goodbye to Diana. Diana replied that it means that if it weren't for Charlene, Albert would have left without saying a word to her. The girl understood perfectly well that she only cared about her sister after the Duke's soul, so she was not surprised by anything. And then Albert quietly said that when he left Diana, he would not forget her. The girl looked at the Duke and said that because of the heavy and noisy rain, she did not hear what he said. The Duke came closer and said that he was grateful to Lady Diana for everything. The girl replied that he spoke as if they would never see each other again. Albert said that in life, there are all sorts of situations, but being here because of his illness, he is a burden for his sister and did not know that it would be so difficult to return back. The Duke approached even more and wanted to add something, but suddenly the door swung open. Frightened, Charlene and Andrew ran into the room and shouted that something was wrong with the knight Diego. The Duke turned around in surprise, but Diana still did not understand who he was talking about. Running into another room, the girl saw a knight lying on the floor unconscious. Diana immediately noticed the icy skin and cold breath and immediately wondered if he had contracted magic poisoning. Andrew screamed that he needed to urgently move him to a convenient place and call a doctor, but Diana told him not to touch him or do anything. When the brother turned around in surprise and said that he needed help, the girl replied that she could help him. The Duke came up from behind and asked if Diana had the crystal with her, but she had already managed to get it. Charlene looked at her friend in surprise and asked what she was going to do. Diana, without turning around, apologized for not telling her earlier, but now there is no time to explain. At the moment, she had nothing to say to her friend because if she found out the truth, she would still be angry. Diana just said that as soon as she finishes, she promises to tell everything. But this is what happened 5 minutes before the knight lost consciousness. The Duke came to Diana to inform her that he urgently needed to go north. The knight managed to secretly look and find out that this was exactly the lady from the conversations. Charlene noticed that the knight was standing at the door of the room and reproachfully said that it was not good to eavesdrop. But before the Duke left Diana, the knight witnessed a conversation between Albert and his sister. Charlene told her brother that he should say goodbye to Diana because they were not strangers. The Duke replied that his sister was mistaken and they were strangers to each other. The girl said that he was lying and he was just scared. It was the first time in his life that the knight had seen such an expression on the Duke's face. And as soon as Albert left, the knight suddenly sneezed and apologized. Andrew asked if everything was okay, and Diego replied that everything was fine and not to worry. A minute later, Charlene and Andrew noticed how Sir Diego's weight began to tremble. The knight tried to say that perhaps this was simply a reaction to the local climate. And suddenly, the next second, Sir Diego began to lose his balance and consciousness and fell to the floor. Diana was already ready to use her energy and crystal to save the knight. But the next moment, someone grabbed her hand, preventing her from doing this. Diana looked up and was surprised that it was the Duke. And then Albert took the crystal from her and placed it in Andrew's palm. The Duke told him that he should try to use his fire energy on Nathan. Diana said in surprise that she should have done it. But the Duke replied that he would not allow Lady Diana to go to bed again. The girl looked at Albert and remembered that just a minute ago he was going to leave without saying goodbye. Before Andrew could touch the knight, a blue light appeared around him, and Andrew exclaimed that he had a feeling that he himself was about to die. Diana told him that this was just the beginning, and after some time this feeling would pass. Then Charlene quietly approached from behind and asked to explain everything that was happening here. Diana looked into her friend's eyes and said that it seemed like the time had come to tell her everything. After their conversation, the Duke said that Diana knew everything from the very beginning and did not apologize that they were silent. Charlene asked if a cure for poisoning by this magic had not yet been invented. The next second, the girl turned to Andrew and cried bitterly on his shoulder. Then she said that she regretted that she did not know anything about it and resisted in every possible way to go north. The Duke replied that that's why he didn't tell her anything, so that his sister wouldn't blame herself. He then added that he wanted to remember these as happy days after so many years. Albert said he was happy thanks only to Charlene. The girl clung to her brother and cried even harder. And then the day came when Diana and Albert had to part. Charlene sat in the carriage while the Duke and Andrew stepped away to talk. Diana turned to her friend again and asked her forgiveness. Charlene replied that everything was fine because they were friends. She understood that Diana remained silent only for the sake of her brother. Charlene added that she knows that Diana did all this to protect her friend, and it's good that she talked about it, at least now. She then thanked her friend for keeping her brother safe. Suddenly, Andrew appeared from behind and, jokingly deciding to scare his sister, abruptly put his hand on her shoulder. Diana didn't like this very much because she was ready to cry, so she was sensitive enough to be scared. But then the Duke approached, and she began to calm down. He then headed towards the carriage, saying that they had to go. But then the girl called out to him and said that he promised to come when the rain stopped, which means tomorrow. Albert looked at Diana and said that perhaps this would happen, and the girl said that then see you tomorrow. Diana added that she would like to say goodbye one more time before the Duke leaves. But Albert didn't answer her and turned towards Andrew. The Duke asked him to continue to take care of his sister Charlene as well. The young man replied that he would do everything to keep the girl safe. At that moment, Diana stood and looked at the Duke with sadness in her eyes. It was pouring rain outside, and Diego asked the Duke if they could wait another day. And Albert replied that this must be done right now. He then reminded the knight that they only had one day left. The Duke told Andrew that it's not that he still doesn't like him. It's just that he sees that his sister becomes happy next to him, so he asked him to protect her. Diana remembered the Duke's last words, and it seemed to her that they would never see each other again. No, he shouldn't leave until the rain stops. But the girl could not cope with an incomprehensible premonition and decided that she needed to immediately go to Raffaello's mansion. Having learned where his sister was going, Andrew tagged along with her, saying that this was another reason to see Charlene. No sooner had they left the gate than they saw the guard talking to some messenger. Then he noticed Lady Diana and said that he had arrived from the palace by order of the prince, who had learned of her illness. Then the messenger pointed to the mountain of gifts and said that it was from His Majesty. Diana thanked her and, asking her to leave all the gifts inside, got back into the carriage. The road seemed very long to Diana, but finally the carriage stopped near Raffaello's mansion. Entering the living room, the girl realized that her premonition had not deceived her. Charlene told them that despite the rain, the Duke and the knight had decided to leave today. Diana felt bitter resentment that Albert had lied to her, and besides, he came and went as he pleased. She could not understand why the Duke decided not to say goodbye to her, because it seemed to her that during this time they had become closer. Now he will return to the north, he will feel good, he will not need her help at all. Charlene looked at her friend and asked if everything was okay. Diana replied that she just wanted to see the Duke again, but since he had already left, she was going straight home. Without turning around, she told her brother that if he wanted, he could stay with Charlene. Going out onto the porch, the girl saw that the rain had completely stopped, and the bright sun had appeared in the sky. Prince Elvis was extremely surprised when he learned that Lady Diana did not even look at the gifts she received from him, and when he was informed that the knight secretly left Raffaello's mansion and Lady Diana went there in the morning, he decided that this did not seem like any coincidence. The servant replied that it also didn't seem like it could be just an accident. The prince's assistant added that he was able to contact that person in the north with the help of a magic stone that the prince gave him. Since that time, the Duke has not appeared in the north. This coincides with the period that the knight was here. Elvis, looking at a ring in his hands, said that there were too many coincidences. The prince put the ring on his finger and ordered him to leave it. The servant began to wonder how it was possible to leave everything like that, because so much work had been done. Elvis walked up to him, put his hand on his shoulder, and repeated once again that everything should be left as it was. And suddenly, from this touch, the servant felt that his body was beginning to go numb and cease to obey. and the room was illuminated with a bright purple light. The prince said that he had changed his mind. The Duke was not important at all. He then added that what's more important now is that he got through it. The servant bowed down, kissed His Highness's shoes, and said that he was absolutely right. Daisy entered the room and said that she was very worried about her mistress, because she was sitting here as if in captivity and did not go out. Then she said that she had brought a letter, but Diana, without even asking who it was from, told her to just put it next to the bed. After some time, the girl took the envelope and was surprised to see that the letter came from the alchemist Fernando. The letter said that he had created new proportions of a cure for magic poisoning and asked that this time they come together. After reading the letter, Diana said that she needed to go out, and Daisy offered to go with her. The girl replied that she would go alone, but she was wondering how Fernando would react to the fact that the Duke had left. Arriving at the alchemist, Diana saw how upset he was by the Duke's departure. He was very worried about his work, and that now he needed to look somewhere for a new experimental subject. Almost crying, Fernando said that there was so much he had not yet managed to do, and the next second he changed and said that he could continue his work if he and Lady Diana went north. The girl was shocked by this proposal, but after a pause, she said that she needed to think. The alchemist continued to persuade Diana and said that there was no time to think. The girl asked what Fernando was going to do if she refused the trip. The alchemist replied that without Diana, it would be more difficult for him to create a medicine, but all means are good, and he will do anything, even if it takes longer. But one way or another, he will go north in any case to feel everything himself through the night. Diana told Fernando that she would contact him later and inform him of her decision. Diana later went to the temple to meet the prophet Matthew. The blind prophet noticed that today the girl came alone without her companion. When Diana told him that he had returned north again, Matthew replied that he now understood the reason for her tears. The girl replied that she did not cry even during her illness, and therefore the prophet's predictions were wrong. Matthew replied that Lady Diana was mistaken, because not only flowing tears can be called crying. He added that crying can be called a state of mind when you part with a loved one. Diana thought that the prophet was right, because although the Duke was not a friend, he was clearly a close person to her. She remembered how much she had done for him during this time, and Albert could so easily leave without telling her anything. At that moment, she felt like an unnecessary wrapper that was thrown away after eating the sweets. Matthew said that her feelings and words serve as an attraction for the Argot, so they will instantly come running to her aid. Diana did not immediately understand who the prophet was talking about until she heard a noise outside the door. As always, continuing to bicker among themselves, Adelaide and Wolfgang entered the room. But then they both saw Diana and said that they had not seen each other for a long time, and therefore were very glad to meet. When the girl asked how they were doing, Adelaide and Wolfgang began to complain about each other in a very funny way. Adelaide claimed that for her, existing wounds were like honor, and Wolfgang was like an idle grasshopper. Wolfgang replied that he deliberately travels to beautiful places, creates songs, and does not wave his sword left and right in vain. Diana grabbed her head. It seemed to her that their arguments would never end. Finally, Wolfgang told the girl that he had always told her to take care of her health, and Adelaide asked if she was still not feeling very well after her illness. The girl smiled and said that she was fine now. The Duke sat in the cold, icy wind and realized that he felt nothing. In the capital, unlike the local climate, he felt chills and excruciating pain. At the same time, simultaneously with these sensations, he was enveloped in a previously unknown warmth. But returning to the north, the Duke could no longer remember this feeling. At first, he regretted running away and was afraid that, having met Diana face to face, he would want to stall for more time. Perhaps he was afraid to realize that they would never meet again. There was a moment when the Duke wanted to be greedy, and after reality appeared before him, he left of his own accord. The Duke thought that perhaps he had done the right thing after all, but he could not understand why his heart was becoming heavier every day. The next day, an unexpected guest appeared at Valerian's estate. It was Princess Deborah. She said that she felt awkward about the reason she came here, and Diana replied that she could speak more boldly. Deborah looked at the girl and asked what she thought about her brother. Diana was very surprised by the question and replied that she thought of Elvis simply as His Majesty. She then asked if the princess had really come all this way just to ask this question, and Deborah replied that the prince really liked Diana. She said that over dinner, Elvis told his father, the emperor, that he had a lover. Deborah looked at Diana and said that this lover was definitely her. The girl replied that she had not given any reason to think so, and the prince went crazy. The next second, she was afraid that she had spoken like that in front of the princess about a member of their family. But Deborah tried not to pay attention to this and said that Elvis was really not himself. She then added that she thought it would turn out badly for their royal family, so she held back, but not with her brother. And if suddenly the prince confesses his sympathy for her, then Diana should cut him off with the phrase that she is already dating the knight. The girl realized that the princess meant Duke Albert. Deborah stood up and said that maybe she had gone too far. Diana replied that everything was fine, because she understood how the princess was worried about her brother since she came here. Deborah said she was a little jealous because Diana and Duchess Raffaella were good friends, and she didn't have those feelings for anyone. She was grateful for that occasion and the meeting with Diana on the balcony. And so now she plucked up courage and came. It seemed to the girl that with that conversation she might have changed the princess's character. The princess said that even with her maids she could not find a common language. So that day at the ball she took out her anger on Charlene. Deborah admitted that apparently she does not know how to manage personal connections, and therefore she takes any talk about herself seriously. The next moment the princess was very surprised, because Diana said that Charlene would help her. The girl stood up and added that even if someone is angry, it will be enough to sincerely apologize and everything will pass. Although she understands very well how difficult it is sometimes to apologize. Diana approached the princess, hugged her, and added that sometimes you need to act more courageously so as not to be offended. Deborah felt the warmth from Diana's hands and wanted to stay like that for as long as possible. After Princess Diana left, she wanted to close the door because she was a little tired from her visit and from His Majesty's gifts. But then her parents appeared and asked to open the door. Brother Andrew banged on the door and asked to know whether Princess Deborah had really come. But Diana did not want to open it and decided to write on a piece of paper all the facts that happened that day. The first was a meeting with the prophet Matthew, who spoke significant words. Next was the sudden appearance of Adelaide and Wolfgang. Then this visit from the princess and the conversation about the prince. All this taken together was nothing more than a harbinger of a storm. Diana stood up abruptly and decided that it was necessary to urgently prepare for all this. The next second, the girl caught the hem of her dress on a chair leg and fell onto the bed. Diana realized why she couldn't concentrate. Duke Albert was the reason. She wanted to throw thoughts about him out of her head, but it didn't work. And Diana was ready to go north to give him a good shake by the collar. And then she remembered that the question of her marriage was beginning to be raised, and if the king ordered it, her father would not be able to resist him. Diana subconsciously compared Prince Elvis and Duke Albert and understood that Prince I was completely unsuitable. For a second, she imagined that her fiancé should be brave, handsome, indifferent, and cold towards other women, and at the same time warm and gentle towards her. Diana jumped up in horror, thinking that she was again representing Duke Albert. The girl decided that the only way to avoid marriage with the royal family was to run away to a place where they wouldn't get her. In addition, the girl understood that marriage to the prince would certainly make her and Princess Deborah bitter enemies. Many acquaintances who communicate well with her will turn away from her, including Rael. Unable to reach Diana, the father offered to come and talk to her tomorrow. At that moment, Diana opened the door and said that it was very good that the whole family was gathered. She looked at her mother, at her father, and then at her brother, and decisively said that she was going north.